Hey guys, tonight we are going to leave the grime and toil of the 18th century docks behind and sign up for a life of adventure, freedom, and untold riches on the high seas. Or, at least, that's what the recruitment pitch in the Smoky Tavern would have you believe. The reality is, well, the food was so bad that a cannonball might have seemed like a pleasant alternative. You'd be surprised what truly posed the greatest threat to a pirate's life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The cobblestones under your worn-out shoes are slick with something you'd rather not identify. It's a mix of rain, mud, and the general filth of a port city like Bristol or Port Royal. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and the faint, salty promise of the ocean just beyond the rooftops. For you, life on land has been anything but a fairy tale. It's a cycle of back-breaking labor for pennies, a damp room you share with two other souls, and a constant, gnawing hunger that a stale loaf of bread can never quite satisfy. The King's Navy is always looking for men, but you've heard the story's brutal discipline, wages that are rarely paid, and the constant threat of being pressed into service against your will. So tonight, you find yourself in the darkest corner of a tavern called the Salty Dog or something equally uninspired. The ale is watery, but it's cheap, and it's here, hunched over your cup, that you hear the whispers. A ship, they say, a ship looking for a crew, not a merchant vessel, not a navy frigate. Something different, a ship that operates on the account. A man with a confident swagger and surprisingly clean teeth for the era slides onto the bench opposite you. He doesn't offer you a job, he offers you a proposition. He speaks of freedom, of a brotherhood where every man has a vote. He doesn't talk about wages, he talks about shares. A full share of whatever is taken. No captains whipping you for sport. No bowing to nobles on their ship. The captain is elected, and can be voted out just as easily. This is your first encounter with a court. Romanticized truth of piracy, the pirate code, or the articles of agreement. Before you even set foot on the ship, you're presented with a document. The captain, a man elected for his skill and nerve, reads the articles aloud. 1 man, 1 vote, a detailed pay scale, not of wages, but of compensation for injuries, a handsome sum of silver for a lost leg, a slightly smaller one for an arm, even a payment for an eye. All plunder is to be brought to the main mast and divided fairly. It's a shockingly democratic system for an age of absolute monarchy. You, a landless, penniless laborer, are being offered a vote, a voice, and a contract. You make your mark a simple X next to your name. You feel a surge of something you haven't felt in years. Hope. Of course, the glamour of this moment hides a much grittier reality. A lesser-known fact is that many pirates weren't just treasure-hungry psychopaths, they were, in essence, maritime rebels. They were sailors fleeing the horrendous conditions of legitimate naval and merchant ships. They were creating a floating, egalitarian society out of sheer desperation. Historians still argue to this day about the true nature of this golden age. Was it merely a short-lived, violent crime spree fueled by greed? Or was it a genuine, radical social experiment, a floating republic of outcasts, defined as much by what they were running from as what they were sailing toward? For now, you don't care about the academic debate. You care about the promise of gold, yes, but also the promise of being treated like a man, not an animal. You follow your new crewmates through the winding, dark streets, down to the docks. There she is, the ship. She's not a grand galleon, but a swift, plain sloop. Her masts like skeletal fingers against the moonlit clouds. She smells of tar, salt, and damp wood. In your excitement, you barely notice the others smell a faint, slightly sour odor emanating from the barrels being hoisted aboard. The supplies, Your food for the foreseeable future. But who cares about that now? You're a free man. You're a pirate. You climb the rope ladder, your heart pounding with the thrill of the unknown, and you step onto the deck, ready to conquer the world. The illusion is perfect. The initial thrill of being on deck gives way to the organized chaos of departure. The ship, which you now know is called the Sea Serpent, is a hive of activity. Men are scurrying up the rigging, their bare feet finding holds you can't even see. Others are coiling ropes, swabbing the last of the shore grime from the deck, and turning the capstan to weigh anchor. The rhythmic chanting of a sea shanty rises in the air, a surprisingly cheerful sound that helps coordinate the heavy labor. You, Bindo, are mostly told to stay out of the way or haul on a rope when a strong back is needed. Your attention, however, is drawn to the steady stream of cargo still being winched aboard. This isn't treasure, this is survival. This is what the man you now know as the quartermaster is meticulously checking off a list. The quartermaster, a stern man with a scar that splits his left eyebrow, is arguably the most important person on the ship, even more so than the captain in day-to-day matters, while the captain commands in battle. The quartermaster commands in all other affairs. He is the law. He distributes the rations, the water, the rum, and one day, he will distribute the plunder. He is the voice of the crew, elected to ensure fairness. You watch him gesture, and another massive barrel is lowered into the hold with a heavy, booming thud. You get a closer look at these supplies, your provisions for the next several months. The first thing you notice is the water, casks upon casks of it, freshly filled from a spring just outside of town. The water looks clear for now, cool and inviting. It's hard to imagine it being anything else. Then comes the meat. Huge barrels of salted beef and pork. It's not an appetizing sight. The meat is a dull, brownish red, packed in a thick crust of coarse grey salt. The smell is intensely briny, almost chemical. A crewmate, seeing your dubious expression, claps you on the back. Don't you worry, he chuckles. The salt pulls the water out, keeps it from rotting, good for months, tastes like a leather boot, mind you, but it's food. This method of preservation was the backbone of all long-distance sea travel, a fundamental piece of maritime logistics. Next, you see the sacks of flour and their heavy wooden crates. Inside these crates is your bread, not soft, or loaves, but ship's biscuit, also known as hardtack. You'll come to have a very intimate relationship with this stuff. For now, it just looks like large, thick, pale crackers, drilled with holes to help with the baking process. They are famously hard, but they are dry and, at this moment, clean. And then, of course, there's the alcohol. There are barrels of beer, which is considered more of a food than a drink, a source of liquid and calories that is safer to drink than water might soon become. And, most importantly, there are the barrels of rum. Dark, potent, and a cornerstone of pirate morale and, as you'll soon learn, pirate medicine. You see the ship's cook for the first time. H.E.S. an older man with a wooden leg, a classic trope that turns out to be historically accurate. Cooking was a job for a man who could no longer fight in the rigging or in a boarding party. He supervises the stowing of his supplies with a practiced eye. Here we stumble upon a curious, greasy little secret of naval life, the slush fund. As the cook boils the heavily salted meat to make it even remotely edible, a thick layer of fat, the slush, rises to the surface. This fat was skimmed off and collected in a barrel. It was a valuable commodity, sold to tallow makers in port to be used for candles or soap. The money earned from this greasy byproduct was the cook's to keep, becoming a sort of informal fund for the crew, often used to buy small luxuries. The term slush fund has survived to this day, a direct, albeit sanitized, descendant of that barrel of boiled, salty fat. Looking at this mountain of monotonous food, a question enters your mind. Is this really better than the King's Navy? It's a point historians still debate. Was the pirate diet an improvement on the food served on merchant or naval vessels on one hand, Pirates operated with smaller crews on smaller ships, meaning their plundered goods went further. A captured merchant ship might yield fresh livestock, wine, or fruit. A bounty that would be a feast for 80 pirates but a mere snack for a 500-man naval crew. On the other hand, the Royal Navy had a massive, if inefficient, supply chain. Their food was terrible, but it was usually there. A pirate ship, subject to the whims of fortune, could go for months without a prize, slowly starving on its own rotting supplies. The answer is likely that it varied wildly from voyage to voyage. Sometimes you feasted like kings, but most of the time, you were probably just as hungry, if not more so, than the sailors you ran away from. But these are worries for another day. The last of the supplies are stowed, the hatches are battened down, and the ship finally catches the wind. You stand at the rail, watching the shore and the life you knew shrink into the distance. The sea serpent cuts through the waves, and a feeling of profound freedom washes over you. The air is clean, the horizon is endless, and the future is an open ocean of possibility. For now, the water is cool, the meat is just salty, and the hope is still fresh. The first few days at sea pass in a blur of new routines. You are assigned to a mess, a small group of 6 men who will eat and work together. You learn to tie knots you never knew existed, to climb the red lines without looking down, and to tell the difference between the dozen or so identical-looking sails. Life is governed by the ship's bell, which marks the passage of 4 watches. You work for 4 hours, then have 8 hours off, a cycle that runs continuously, day and night. The work is hard, but the air is clean, and for the first time, you eat 3 meals a day. Well, meals is perhaps too generous a word. On your 3rd day out, the quartermaster presides over the distribution of the day's main ration. He stands by an open barrel, and one by one, your messmates step forward to receive their share. When it's your turn, he dips a hand into the barrel and pulls out a flat, off-white square, about the size of your palm and an inch thick. He drops it into your waiting hands. It's surprisingly heavy, dense like a piece of fired clay. This is it. Your first piece of ship's biscuit. Your hardtack. You turn it over in your hands. It's pockmarked with a few small holes, a detail you'll later learn is to help the thing bake all the way through. It smells faintly of baked flour and dust. It doesn't smell bad, just inert. You look around and see the other men treating their portion with a grim familiarity. One of them, a grizzled sailor named Silas with more tattoos than teeth, sees the look of uncertainty on your face. He grins. Go on, lad, give it a try. Feeling a bit foolish, you lift the biscuit to your mouth and take a bite. Or rather, you try to take a bite. Your teeth connect with the surface with a loud, jarring clack that seems to echo in your skull. It's like biting a rock. There is absolutely no give. You try again, with more force, and the sharp pain shoots through your jaw. You've accomplished nothing except making yourself look like a fool and possibly chipping a molar. Silas lets out a hearty laugh. Not unkindly. Oh, we've all been there. We call M to $S for a reason. This is your introduction to the staple food of the sea, the foundation of every sailor's diet for centuries. Hardtack was a marvel of food preservation technology. It's a simple, almost brutally minimalist recipe: flour, water, and maybe a little salt. The dough is kneaded into a dense slab and then baked twice, sometimes even 4 times, until every last molecule of moisture has been cooked out of it. This process is actually where the word biscuit comes from. It's derived from the old French biscuit, which literally means twice cooked. The goal wasn't taste or texture, it was longevity. A properly made and stored batch of hardtack could, in theory, last for years. There are stories of sailors eating biscuits that were baked decades earlier. An older sailor from your mess shows you the proper technique. He takes his biscuit and dunks it into his tin cup, which is filled with the ship's beer. You let it soak, he mumbles. Give it time. It'll soften. Eventually. You follow his lead. pushing your own rock-hard ration into your cup. It sinks with a defiant top. You watch it, waiting for some kind of transformation. But for a long minute, nothing happens. It just sits there, an inedible brick submerged in weak beer. Herein lies a debate that, while not raging in academic circles, certainly occupied the minds of millions of sailors. Was it better to soak your hardtack or to try and break it apart? Some men, desperate for a crunch, would place the biscuit on the deck and smash it with a belaying pin, gathering the crumbs to mix into a soup or stew. This was a noisy, messy affair. The more common method was soaking, but what you soaked it in determined the outcome. In beer or water, it slowly turned into a flavorless, pulpy mash. In the hot, greasy stews the cook sometimes prepared, it might become vaguely dumpling-like. The one universal truth was that it was never, ever pleasant. After what feels like an eternity, you poke at your submerged biscuit with a finger. The edges have softened slightly, turning into a slimy, pasty goo. You fish it out. It's now a bizarre combination of textures, a mushy exterior with a still rock-hard core. You take a tentative bite of the softened part. The taste is nothing. It's the taste of wet flour. It's not salty, not sweet, just a bland, starchy substance that fills your belly but provides zero satisfaction. It is purely functional fuel. You see Silas take his soaked biscuit, lay it on the table, and give it a sharp tap with his knife handle. You wonder why. But the question is lost as you focus on choking down your own meal. This tapping, you will soon learn, is a crucial part of the ritual, one you'd adopt with a shudder in the weeks to come. For now, this first encounter is just about the hardness and the blandness. It's about the slow dawning realization that the feasts you dreamed of back on shore are a fantasy. This is the reality. This is your bread. Day in, day out, you look at the unit and half of your soggy biscuit. Then at the endless blue ocean outside the porthole. The adventure is real, but so is the price, and you've just taken your first tasteless, difficult bite. A week passes. Then, too, the routines of the ship are now second nature to you. You can climb the rigging in the dock. You know the names of the sails, and you've even learned a few of the sea shanties the men sing while working. The ship cuts a lonely path through an endless expanse of blue, chasing the horizon. But while your skills as a sailor are growing, the quality of your provisions has begun a slow, inevitable decline. And it starts with the most essential element of all, the water. The water that was so clear and fresh when it came aboard is no longer either of those things. When you go to fill your tin cup from the scuttle but the main cask of water kept on deck for the crew, you notice a change. The water now has a faint yellowish-green tinge. You dip your cup in, and as you bring it up, you see tiny green specks swirling within it. It's algae. The wooden casks, which are never perfectly sterile, have become a breeding ground. The taste has changed, too. It's no longer crisp and refreshing. It has a flat, stale taste, and a slimy texture that coats your tongue. You can smell it before you drink it, a faint, musty odor, like a damp cellar. The crew takes it in stride. She's turned in, one of your messmates says with a shrug, as if discussing the weather. This process was so common, so expected, that sailors had a term for it. They would say the water was roping or going off. You force yourself to drink it, because dehydration under the hot sun is a swift and merciless killer. But with every gulp, you feel a slight revulsion. You try to drink it quickly, to not let it linger in your mouth, but the unpleasant, swampy aftertaste remains. This rapid spoilage of fresh water was one of the single greatest challenges of long-distance sea travel. The knowledge of microbiology was centuries away. Sailors didn't know about bacteria or microbes, they just knew that water, when stored in a barrel for weeks on end, went bad. The wooden casks themselves were part of the problem. They were often reused without proper cleaning, harboring microscopic life from previous voyages. The constant motion of the ship sloshed the water, aerating it and helping the algae bacteria to flourish. To combat this, sailors developed a number of desperate, and largely ineffective remedies. Sometimes they would drop a piece of hot iron into the cask, believing the heat would purify the contents. Other times, they'd add a bit of vinegar, hoping the acidity would kill the slime. But the most common solution wasn't to fix the water, but to mask its foulness. Here's a little-known fact that adds a layer of grime to the story. The slime wasn't just in the water. It was on the inside of the barrels themselves. The sweet water in the hold would slowly be consumed, and as the level in the cask dropped, the dark wood above the waterline would become a perfect breeding ground for thick, slimy bacterial mats. Sometimes, when a barrel was almost empty, a sailor would be sent down to scrape the sides to get the last dregs, coming back up covered in a foul-smelling, gelatinous goo. It was a truly disgusting job reserved for the lowest of the low. The state of the water leads to a new daily ritual. Each morning, the quartermaster unlocks a secure cage in his cabin and brings out the rum. He stands by the scuttlebutt with a measure, and as each man fills his cup with the slimy water, the quartermaster adds a precise ration of rum. This isn't a generous pour for a party. It's a carefully measured dose. This mixture is grog. You've heard the word. Of course, you'd always imagine pirates swigging it cheerfully on deck. But now you understand its true purpose. You stir the rum into your cup of green-tinned water. The potent spirit doesn't magically make the water fresh again. The algae is still there, but the strong, sugary, alcoholic flavor of the rum overpowers the swampy taste of the water. It makes the undrinkable drinkable. It was a practical solution to a life-threatening problem. The alcohol also acted as a mild antiseptic, though the sailors of the time wouldn't have understood the science behind it. They just knew that men who drank grog seemed to get sick less often than those who, for whatever reason, stuck to the foul water alone. Historians still debate the exact origin story of grog. The most popular version attributes its invention to British Vice Admiral Edward Vernon in 1740. He was nicknamed Old Grog because of the geogram cloak he often wore, and he ordered his sailors' rum ration to be diluted with water to reduce drunkenness. But the practice of mixing spirits with water was likely far older and more informal, especially on pirate ships where rules were more flexible. Was it a top-down disciplinary measure, as the naval story suggests, or a bottom-up survival tactic born of necessity? The truth is probably a bit of both, evolving independently in different naval cultures. As you take your first sip of grog, the sharp burn of the cheap rum hits the back of your throat, followed by the familiar, slimy texture of the water. It's a strange, dissonant combination. It's not enjoyable. It's not a treat. It's medicine. It's a tool for survival. You look out at the vast ocean, a world of water that you cannot drink. You hold in your hand a cup of water that you can drink, but only because it's been made barely palatable by alcohol. The romance of the sea is fading, replaced by a thirsty, practical reality. The novelty of your new life has now completely worn off, replaced by a monotonous, grinding routine. The sky is the same endless blue, the sea the same restless gray, and the food is the same soul-crushing trio hardtack, drug, and salted meat. Today, for the midday meal, the cook and his mate have hauled a huge slab of the salted beef out of its barrel in the hold. It doesn't look like meat anymore. It's a stiff, grayish-brown plank, so thoroughly impregnated with salt that it's rock hard. You watch as the cook's mate has to use a small hand axe to hack off a manageable chunk. The chunk is then dropped into a huge copper cauldron filled with seawater and hung over the galley fire. This is the first step in a long process to make the meat, even remotely edible. It must be boiled, and boiled, and boiled again, to draw out the punishing amount of salt. As it cooks, a greasy, scummy foam rises to the top, which the cook diligently skims off. This, you now know, is the valuable slush. The smell from the cauldron isn't appetizing. It's a heavy, piney odor, more like a chemistry experiment than a kitchen. After hours of boiling, the meat is finally served. A piece is plopped into your wooden bowl. It's a stringy, greyish mass, swimming in a bit of watery broth. You poke it with your spoon. It has the texture of wet rope. You lift a piece to your mouth and begin to chew, and chew, and chew. The first thing that hits you is the salt. Despite the hours of boiling, the meat is still incredibly salty. It's a deep, chemical salt meat that makes your tongue tingle. The second thing you notice is the toughness. It's a fibrous, crystalline workout for your jaw. Eating your portion takes a solid 15 minutes of determined, joyless mastication. The flavor, what little there is faint and vaguely beef-like, but it's completely overwhelmed by the salt and the sheer effort required to break it down. This was the protein powerhouse of the age of sail. Salting was an ancient, effective method of preservation. By packing the meat in salt, water is drawn out of the muscle cells, creating an environment where the bacteria that cause spoilage cannot thrive. A barrel of properly salted beef or pork could last for years, a critical factor for voyages that could last for months, or even a full year without resupply. The meat was oft unnicknamed salt horse by the sailors, a grimly accurate description of its taste and texture. But preservation came at a steep price in terms of quality. The meat used was often the cheapest, toughest cuts available, and the salting process itself was brutal. Barrels would be filled with meat, and a super concentrated brine would be pumped in, a process called wet salting. Sometimes, they were just packed in dry salt. In either case, the final product was more of a salt-infused meat-like substance than what you would recognize as food. Now here's a curious and slightly disgusting tidbit about this process. The coopers who made the barrels for the Royal Navy were required to brand their mark onto the cows, but sometimes, unscrupulous suppliers would get their hands on old barrels, already branded with a reputable maker's mark, and fill them with subpar, borderline rancid meat. This was a form of fraud. However, some pirates, particularly those who had served in the Navy, knew which brands to trust. When they captured a prize, they would specifically look for the barrels from certain coopers, knowing the contents were likely to be of a higher quality or at least less likely to be actively poisonous. It was a strange form of brand loyalty born from a world of rotten corruption. You look down at the remaining grey lump in your bowl. You have to eat it. It's calories. It's protein. It's what will give you the strength to haul on the ropes and climb the rigging. But you're already eggs. You see some of the veteran sailors pull out their knives and slice their portion into paper-thin slivers, which they chew on slowly, like a piece of tough jerky. You try the same, and it helps, but it doesn't make the experience any more pleasant. The historical debate here revolves around just how bad this meat could get. Some accounts describe it as simply tough and salty, but edible. Others, however, paint a far grimmer picture. They speak of meat that, when brought out of the barrel, was tinged with green or black, where the preservation had failed in spots. They describe cooks using heavy spices, if they had any, to mask the taste of decay. Some sailors claimed the meat was so old and hard that men would carve it into buttons or little trinkets, as if it were a piece of wood. Was this just sailor hyperbole, a form of gallows humor, or was it the literal truth? The reality is likely somewhere in between. The quality varied enormously. Sometimes it was just bad, other times it was a genuine health hazard. You finally manage to swallow the last fibrous piece. Your mouth feels briny and dry. You wash it down with a mouthful of grog, the rum and slimy water doing little to improve the lingering taste. This is your feast. This is the bounty of the sea. It's not a meal to be enjoyed, it's a task to be completed. You are not dining, you are fueling. The dream of pirate feasts, of roasted pigs on a beach, feels a million miles away. The reality is this lump of grey, salty misery in a wooden bowl. Several weeks have now bled into one another, and the ship has become your entire world. The vastness of the ocean no longer feels like freedom, it feels like an isolating, featureless prison. The tedium is broken only by the work, the watches, and the grim ritual of meals. The water is now a thick, green soup. The salted meat is a familiar, Enjoy this chore. But a new horror is about to be introduced to your palate, one that will come to define your relationship with the ship's biscuit. It's midday, and your mess is gathered around a small, weathered table below deck. The air in the crew's quarters is thick and stagnant, smelling of unwashed bodies, damp wood, and bilge water. The quartermaster comes by with a sack of hardtack. He reaches an armed hand to your daily ration. You take it, expecting the familiar, inert slab of baked flour. But this time, you notice something different. The surface of the biscuit is not entirely smooth. There are tiny, dark specks on it, and a few small, almost perfectly circular holes that you don't remember seeing before. You brush at one of the specks with your thumb, and it moves. You look closer, a knot of dread tightening in your stomach. The dark specks are insects. They are small, black beetles, with long, distinctive snouts, and they are crawling slowly, noisily, across the surface of your food. You quickly inspect the rest of the biscuit. It's riddled with them. You can see them emerging from the tiny holes, their antennae twitching. You feel a wave of nausea. One of your messmates, the old veteran Cyrus, notices your horrified expression. He doesn't laugh this time. He just sighs. A long, weary sound. "Oh," he says, peering at your biscuit. "The weevils have found us. Or rather, we found them." This is your first meeting with the ship's most notorious and ubiquitous inhabitants, the biscuit weevils. These creatures, technically a type of beetle, didn't just infest the biscuits, they were born in them. The process started long before you ever set foot on the ship. The flour used to make the hardtack was often already contaminated with weevil eggs. The baking process, especially for biscuits as thick as these, wasn't always hot enough in the center to kill all the eggs, so the hardtack would be packed away in barrels, a seemingly sterile food source. But inside, a tiny, ticking time bomb was waiting. After weeks or months in the war, dark hold of a ship, the eggs would hatch. The larvae would burrow through the hard biscuit, eating as they went, creating a network of tunnels. Then they would pupate and emerge as adult beetles, ready to repeat the cycle. Your biscuit isn't just a piece of food anymore. It's a nursery. It's an apartment building. You look around at the other men. They are all inspecting their own portions with a grim resignation. Some have more bugs, some have less, but no one's biscuit is clean. A lesser known, and frankly more disgusting, aspect of this infestation was not the adult beetles you could see, but the larvae and pupae you couldn't. The inside of a heavily infested biscuit was often more insect than flour, a honeycomb of tunnels filled with a fine, powdery dust that was a mixture of flour and insect excrement. The sailors called this substance weevil dust. When you soaked your biscuit, you weren't just softening the flour, you were rehydrating a compressed brick of insect life stages. The question that immediately springs to your mind is, what do? You can't possibly eat this. You look at the quartermaster, but he just shrugs. There are no other biscuits. This is it. This is the food. To throw it away is to starve. The academic world still has some lingering questions about the sheer scale of this problem. While personal accounts from sailors are filled with stories of weevils, it's hard to quantify just how bad it was on the average voyage. Did every single biscuit on every ship become infested, or was it a problem that plagued some voyages more than others? Depending on the quality of the flour and the length of the journey, archaeological evidence from shipwrecks, where preserved biscuits have been found, confirms the presence of weevil tunnels, so we know it was a real and widespread issue. But the true weevil to flour ratio on the average pirate's dinner plate remains a matter of historical conjecture, a detail lost to the bellies of long-dead sailors. You look at your crawling meal in despair. Another sailor, a young man like yourself, throws his biscuit on the deck in disgust. The quartermaster's eyes narrow. "You eat what you're given," he says, his voice low and dangerous. "There's no more. That's your lot for the day. Waste it if you want." The young man, Jason, slowly picks his biscuit back up. You are faced with a stark choice: hunger or revulsion. Your stomach growls, a painful reminder that you haven't eaten since the small, salty portion of beef this morning. The work on deck is hard, and it demands fuel. Your survival instinct begins to war with your gag reflex. You look again at the biscuit, at the tiny black beetles making their slow journey across the barren landscape of your dinner. This, you realize, is a new low. The romantic image of the pirate as a swashbuckling adventurer has been completely shattered, replaced by the pathetic reality of a man contemplating eating bugs to stay alive. The journey has just gotten significantly worse. Staring at the weevil-infested biscuit in your hand, you feel a sense of paralysis. Your stomach churns, but the thought of putting that crawling thing in your mouth is almost unbearable. It is in this moment of despair that you begin to notice the actions of the veteran sailors around you. They are not panicky. They are not disgusted, or if they are, they hide it well. They are simply dealing with it. They have a system. Silas, the old salt, takes his biscuit and holds it over the dim, flickering light of the mess lantern. He gives the biscuit a sharp, authoritative tap with the handle of his knife. Tap. A few dark specks fall onto the table. Tap. Tap. More specks fall. He continues this rhythmic tapping, rotating the biscuit, knocking it against the wood with a practiced, steady beat. He isn't smashing it, he's coaxing its inhabitants out. Come on out, ye little devils, he mutters to the biscuit. The landlord's home. This is the art of knocking the biscuit, a grimly necessary skill for any long-haul sailor. You watch, fascinated. It's a simple, yet ingenious solution. The vibrations from the tapping startle the weevils and dislodge them from their tunnels, causing them to fall out onto the table. The men would then sweep the dislodged insects onto the floor. Of course, this only got rid of the adult beetles, the ones large enough to be knocked out. The eggs, the larvae, and the weevil dust remained firmly embedded within. Another sailor demonstrates a different technique. He finds the darkest corner of the crew's quarters, where the light from the lantern barely reaches. He explains that the weevils, like many insects, are averse to light. By sitting in the dark, he can take a bite of the biscuit without seeing what's in it. What the eye don't see, the stomach don't mind, he says with a shrug. This philosophy was famously summarized by one drive, Samuel Johnson, who, when asked about life at sea, remarked that sailors in the dark preferred the weevil Y biscuit because they couldn't distinguish it from the good ones. In the light, the sight of the infestation was too much to bear. You decide to try the tapping method. You hold your biscuit over the table and give it a tentative tap. A single beetle falls out. You feel a small, grim sense of accomplishment. You tap it again, harder this time. 2 more fall out. Along with a fine powder you try not to think about. You continue this process for a solid minute, your knuckles smarting from the impact. Finally, the stream of falling specks trickles to a stop. You inspect the biscuit. It looks cleaner. Not clean, but cleaner. The visible crawlers are gone. Now comes the moment of truth. You close your eyes, take a deep breath, and dunk the debugged biscuit into your mug of grog. As it soaks, you try to push the knowledge of what remains inside to the back of your mind. The veterans called the weevils extra protein or seagoing plums. This gallows humor was a coping mechanism, a way to stomach the unthinkable. A strange and little-known byproduct of this entire situation was the biscuit keel hauling. Sometimes, a particularly infested barrel of hardtack would be emptied into a large net. The net would then be tied to the ship and dragged through the water for a while. The idea was that the seawater would wash away the adult weevils and some of the dust. The now sodden biscuits would then be laid out on the deck to dry under the hot sun. This rarely worked well. The biscuits often became soggy and moldy, or didn't dry properly, leading to a whole new world of fungal unpleasantness. But it shows the level of desperation sailors faced. The debate among historians, or perhaps, more accurately, among historical enthusiasts, is which method was truly better. Was it better to see what you were knocking out, or to eat in ignorance in the dark. It speaks to a fundamental question of psychology. Is it worse to know the disgusting truth, or to suspect it but be able to deny it? There's no right answer. Of course, it was a matter of personal preference in a world of terrible options. Most sailors likely used a combination of both. They'd knock the biscuit to get rid of the worst of the visible bugs, and then eat the remainder with as little light and thought as possible. You fish the now soggy lump out of your grog. It looks the same as it always has, a grey, pasty mass. You take a bite. It tastes of wet flour, cheap rum, and swampy water. Is there another taste? A faint, slightly nutty, peppery flavor you haven't noticed before? You immediately tell yourself it's your imagination. It has to be. You force yourself to swallow, your mind actively suppressing the origin of this newfound flavor. You manage to finish the entire portion. It's like a lead weight in your stomach. You didn't enjoy it. You feel vaguely ill. But you are not hungry anymore. You have successfully eaten your first fully infested meal and kept it down. You look over at Silas, who gives you a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval. You have passed another grim initiation into this life. You have learned to eat what would make a landsman retch. It is not a victory you feel proud of, but it is a victory for survival, nonetheless. The days continue to crawl by with the same slowness as the weevils in your biscuit. Your palate has become accustomed to a baseline level of unpleasantness. The slimy water, the rock-salt beef, the buggy hardtack. This is just food now. But, as the voyage lengthens, the forces of decay begin to work their magic on the salted meat, and you are about to discover the next level of culinary horror. It begins with a smell. The galley, usually just smelling of brine and smoke, now carries a new, unpleasant undertone. It's a faint, sickly sweet, pungent aroma. You notice it when the cook and his mate hoist a new barrel of salted pork up from the hole. This barrel has been on board for a while, sitting in the damp, warm darkness, and something inside has gone wrong. When they pry the lid off, the smell intensifies, even from a dozen feet away. It makes your nose wrinkle. The cook, a man named Pegleg Pete for the most obvious of reasons, peers into the barrel and lets out a string of curses that are both creative and shockingly blasphemous. He uses a long hook to fish out a piece of the pork. When it emerges into the light, you see the problem. The meat is no longer the uniform grayish-pink of preserved pork. It's mottled with patches of iridescent green and a slimy, blackish film. The fat has a yellowish, waxy appearance. The preservation has failed. Pockets of bacteria have managed to survive the brining process and have been slowly putreifying the meat from the inside out. It is, by any sane standard, rotten. You assume, with a sense of relief, that they will throw it overboard. Surely, no one would eat this. But you are wrong. Provisions are low. The nearest port is weeks away, and there's no guarantee of capturing a prize before then. Wasting an entire barrel of meat is not an option. This is where the ship's cook has to transform from a simple food preparer into a master of culinary deception. You watch as Pete and his mate get to work. First, they take the rancid pork and scrub it vigorously with vinegar and sand, trying to scrape off the worst of the surface slime and discoloration. Then, it goes into the cauldron for the usual hours-long boiling to remove the salt. But this time, something new is added. Pete goes to a small, mocked Chester's spice chest. Spices were incredibly valuable, often worth their weight in silver. They were usually part of the plunder from a captured ship. He produces a handful of peppercorns, a few shriveled cloves, and some other strong, aromatic spices you can't identify. He grinds them up with a mortar and pestle and dumps the entire pungent mixture into the boiling cauldron. The goal is simple and devious if you can't get rid of the taste of rot. You bury it under a mountain of a stronger, more acceptable flavor. This practice gave rise to a rather strange culinary myth that has persisted for centuries: the idea that the spice trade was driven by a need to cover up the taste of spoiled meat in medieval and Renaissance Europe. Most food historians today will tell you this is largely untrue. Spices were a luxury item, a status symbol. If you were wealthy enough to afford a lot of spices, you were almost certainly wealthy enough to afford fresh meat. The myth likely comes from situations exactly like the one you are witnessing now, not in the castles of kings, but on the desperate, floating world of a ship at sea, where throwing away food was not an option. Here, the theory becomes stark reality. A particularly nasty secret of the ship's galley is a substance known as verjuice. Verjuice is the highly acidic juice of unripe grapes or crab apples. While it could be used for legitimate culinary purposes on a ship, it had a more practical application. A splash of this incredibly sour liquid in a stew could help to cut through the taste of rancidity and trick the palate, the same way a squeeze of lemon can brighten up a dish. Cooks guarded their verjuice stash carefully. It was a powerful tool in their arsenal of trickery. The historical debate here is a subtle one. Did cooks knowingly serve food that was dangerously spoiled, or did they believe that through boiling and spicing, they were rendering it safe without a concept of germ theory? They likely operated on a practical, results-based system. They knew that improperly handled meat could make the crew sick with dysentery or other stomach ailments, which they called the flux. But they probably attributed it to a vague notion of bad air or an imbalance of humors. They likely believed that if they boiled it long enough and it tasted okay thanks to the spices, it was probably fine. The line between spoiled but safe to eat and actively poisonous was one they walked every single day, often with the entire crew's health hanging in the balance. Hours later, the stew is served. It's a thick, brownish slurry of boiled, spoiled pork, broken up hardtack, and whatever else the cook could find. The smell is overwhelmingly of pepper and clove. You take a tentative spoonful. The spice is so strong it's almost painful, making your tongue burn. It completely numbs your taste buds. Beneath the initial blast of spice, you can still detect a faint, dull, slightly sweet aftertaste, the taste of decay. The texture of the meat is soft, almost mushy, having been boiled into submission. You look around. No one is enjoying the meal, but everyone is eating it. Their faces are grim masks of concentration. You eat your portion as quickly as you can, trying not to breathe through your nose. Every spoonful is a gamble. Will this meal give you the strength to work, or will it leave you doubled over in agony in a few hours? You can only eat, and wait, and hope for the best. The daily grind has settled into a state of managed misery. You've learned to knock your biscuit, to tolerate the slimy water, and to swallow the spiced, questionable meat. Your body is running on a low-grade fuel that provides sustenance but no pleasure. And it is in this state of dreary acceptance that you truly come to understand the role of rum. Back on land, you thought of rum as the drink of celebration, the fiery spirit of pirate freedom. You imagined wild nights of singing and carousing, mugs of rum slushing over the table. The reality, you now see, is far more medicinal and far less joyful. The daily rum ration is not a party, it's a critical piece of shipboard infrastructure, as vital as the sails or the anchor. The ritual is the same every day. The quartermaster, keeper of the ship's most valuable liquid assets, brings the rum cask on deck. He guards it carefully. The distribution is precise. This isn't about getting drunk. In fact, drunkenness, especially while on watch, is a serious offense under the ship's articles. Often punished by flogging or being marooned, the daily ration is enough to feel a slight warmth, to take the edge off the misery, but not enough to truly impair you. As you receive your measure, you mix it into your cup of greenish, algae-filled water. This is the grog you've become so accustomed to. But today, you stop and consider the rum itself. It's a dark, thick, molasses-colored liquid. The smell is potent and sweet, with a harsh, alcoholic bite. This isn't refined, aged rum you might find in a governor's mansion. This is raw, powerful, and cheap. This type of rum, often called Kill Devil by the English-speaking inhabitants of the Caribbean, was a byproduct of the sugar industry. When sugarcane was processed to make refined sugar, a thick, dark, syrupy sludge called molasses was left over. This molasses was then fermented and distilled to create rum. It was a potent spirit that could be produced cheaply and in vast quantities, making it the perfect drink for the sailors, slaves, and scoundrels of the New World. It was, in essence, industrial waste turned into liquid gold. You take a sip of your grog. The primary function, as you know, is to mask the foul taste of the water. The rum's powerful, sugary flavor steamrolls the swampy notes of the algae, making the water physically possible to swallow without gagging. Its second function is psychological. The small dose of alcohol provides a brief respite, a momentary lift in spirits in an otherwise bleak existence. It's a chemical comfort, a predictable blip of warmth in a cold, unforgiving world. Here's a little-known fact that highlights the practical, rather than recreational, nature of rum on board. It was also a painkiller. The ship's surgeon, if you were lucky enough to have one, had a limited toolkit. For everything from a toothache to a splinter to the agonizing pain of a compound fracture, rum was the primary anesthetic. A man facing an amputation would be given as much rum as he could drink, not to make him happy, but to render him semi-conscious and dull his senses to the horror of the surgeon's soul. It was a brutal, inefficient anesthetic, but it was often the only one available. But the most important function of the rum in your grog, though you don't understand the science, is that it's keeping you alive. Historians and scientists now recognize that the alcohol in the grog acted as a mild antiseptic, killing some of the harmful bacteria teeming in the foul water. This is why crews on a rum ration often had lower incidences of dysentery and other waterborne diseases than those on ships that had run out of spirits. This leads to a fascinating historical debate. Was the creation of grog in the Royal Navy truly about curbing drunkenness? Or was it an accidental public health masterstroke? The official story, as told by Admiral Vernon's order in 1740, was about discipline. He was tired of his men being too drunk to perform their duties. However, some historians argue that the positive health effects must have been noticed. Even if they weren't understood, sailors on grog ships were healthier. They could work harder and fight better. Was the dilution of rum an intuitive, results-based decision to improve crew fitness, disguised as a disciplinary measure, or was it simply a happy accident, where a solution to one problem, drunkenness, inadvertently solved a much bigger one disease? The true motivation behind the policy remains a subject of speculation. You finish your cup of grog. The familiar burn in your throat is followed by a slow, creeping warmth in your belly. The world doesn't seem quite as sharp-edged as it did 5 minutes ago. The thought of the monotonous afternoon watch is slightly more bearable. The rum is not for fun. It is not for celebration. It's a disinfectant for your drinking water, a painkiller for your aching body, and a balm for your weary soul. It is a tool, and as you set your empty cup down, ready to return to work, you understand that on the Sea Serpent, a barrel of rum is worth more than a chest of gold. Gold can't make rotten water drinkable. Gold can't numb the pain, and gold certainly can't make this life feel, even for a moment, anything less than what it is. The sea has become a purgatory of repetition. The sun rises. You work. You eat your wretched food. You sleep. And you do it all again. It's been over a month since you've seen land. And a subtle but deeply unsettling change is beginning to take place within your own body. It starts not with a dramatic illness, but with a profound and unshakable sense of fatigue. You wake up from your off-watch sleep feeling as if you haven't rested at all. Bone deep weariness settles into your limbs, climbing the rigging. A task that had become second nature now leaves you breathless and dizzy. Your muscles ache with a dull, persistent throb that never quite goes away. You attribute it to the hard work and the poor diet, a simple consequence of this life. But then, other symptoms begin to appear. Your joints begin to ache, particularly your knees and ankles. Old scars you've had for years, long since healed and forgotten, start to itch and turn a strange, purplish color. You feel irritable and sullen. Your mood as grey and monotonous as the sea around you. One morning, while chewing on a particularly tough piece of salt beef, You notice a strange soreness in your mouth. Later, you run your tongue over your gums. They feel swollen, puffy, and strangely tender. You manage to get a look in a small, cracked piece of mirror that one of the crew owns. Your gums are a dark, reddish purple, and looks often spongy. When you press on them lightly with a finger, a drop of blood wells up. A cold dread, colder than any ocean spray, washes over you. You've heard the old sailors talk about this, in hushed, fearful tones. You are seeing the first clear, undeniable signs of scurvy. This was the great plague of the age of sail, a disease more feared than a Spanish warship or a hurricane. It killed more sailors than all other causes combat, shipwreck, and accident combined. For centuries, it was a profound mystery. Healthy men would set sail, and within months, they would be reduced to weak, dying invalids. No one knew what caused it. Theories abounded. Was it the bad air below decks, the dampness, the saltness of the food, laziness, a contagion? We know now, of course, that scurvy is caused by a simple deficiency of vitamin C or ascorbic acid. The human body cannot produce or store vitamin C, so it must be obtained regularly from one's diet. It is essential for the synthesis of collagen, the protein that acts as the glue for all your body's tissues, your skin, your blood vessels, your bones, your gums. Without vitamin C, your body literally starts to fall apart. A lesser known and particularly cruel symptom of scurvy is its psychological effect. The profound lethargy and depression weren't just a reaction to the physical symptoms, they were a direct result of the disease's effect on the brain. Scurvy drains its victims of all motivation and emotional resilience, making them sullen, withdrawn, and melancholic long before the more dramatic physical symptoms appear. This is why it was often misdiagnosed as simple malingering or laziness. You try to hide your condition, but it's impossible. The other men see your fatigue, the way you wince when you chew, and they know. You see the fear and pity in their eyes. Soon, a handful of other men begin to show the same signs: the swollen gums, the aching limbs, the reopening of old wounds as the collagen holding the scar tissue together dissolves. The historical debate surrounding scurvy is not about its cause, which is now well understood, but about why it took so long to find the cure. The frustrating truth is that the cure was discovered and then lost multiple times. As early as 1593, Sir Richard Hawkins noted that oranges and lemons were a miraculous remedy. In 1747, a naval surgeon named James Lind conducted what is often considered one of the first controlled clinical trials in history. He took 12 score-but-I-C sailors and divided them into 6 pairs, giving each pair a different cure. The pair given 2 oranges and 1 lemon a day made a stunningly rapid recovery. Lind published his findings, but his work was largely ignored by the Admiralty for decades. Why? The reasons are complex. There was bureaucratic inertia, a resistance to new ideas, and a lack of understanding of the underlying science. The concept of a deficiency disease was alien. They were looking for a cure you could store in a barrel for 5 years, and fresh fruit didn't fit that model. They experimented with substitutes like syrup of wort or elixir of vitriol, which were useless, so for another 50 years after Lind's experiment, sailors continued to die in droves. For pirates, operating outside of any official system, the situation was even more haphazard. They might stumble upon the cure by capturing a Spanish ship laden with citrus, or by raiding a coastal village for fresh fruit. But it was a matter of luck, not policy. You look at your swollen gums in the mirror again. The fear is palpable. You are on a ship in the middle of the ocean, with no access to the one thing that can save you. The gold you dreamed of is meaningless now. The freedom you sought has become a death sentence. You are trapped on a floating raft of decay, and your own body has begun to rot from the inside out. Every day, the weakness gets worse. The simple act of living has become an exhausting struggle. The real treasure, you now understand, was never gold or silver. It was a simple piece of fruit. something you once took for granted, and it is now more precious than anything else in the world. The physical decay of scurvy is matched only by the psychological decay of monotony. The world has shrunk to the confines of the ship, and your diet has shrunk to 3 endlessly repeating, miserable components. There is no variety. There is no surprise. There is only the grim, predictable rotation of salty, tough, and buggy. This is the hell of monotony, a unique form of torture that slowly grinds down the human spirit. Every morning, you wake up knowing exactly what you will eat. You will force down some Weevil Y hardtack, softened into a paste with slimy water and a splash of rum. At midday, it will be a portion of salt horse or salt pork, boiled into a stringy, grey submission. In the evening, it might be more hardtack, perhaps mashed into the greasy leftovers of the midday stew. The lack of sensory stimulation is maddening. All the food has a similar, depressing texture, either rock hard or mushy soft, with nothing in between. The flavors are a flat, one-dimensional landscape of salt, stale flour, and the aggressive, desperate camouflage of pepper. You begin to vivid, painful dreams of food from your past life. You dream of a crisp apple, the crunch it makes when you bite into it, the burst of sweet, sharp juice on your tongue. You dream of a simple loaf of bread, still warm from the oven, with a thick crust and a soft, chewy interior. You dream of a roasted potato, a piece of cheese that doesn't crawl, a glass of cool, clean water. You wake from these dreams with a sense of profound loss. The memory of these simple pleasures is so clear, so powerful, that it makes your current reality feel even more unbearable. The men talk about food constantly. It's their primary topic of conversation, their shared obsession. They don't talk about grand feasts or complex dishes. They describe, in excruciating detail, the simplest meals. One man will spend an hour describing how his mother used to cook eggs. Another will rhapsodize about the taste of a fresh picked berry. It's a form of self-torture, but they can't stop. This obsessive focus on food is a well-documented psychological response to prolonged deprivation. It was seen in prisoners of war, in besieged cities, and most certainly on the long voyages of the Age of Sail. The mind, starved of real sensory input, creates its own. A strange and little discussed aspect of this monotony was its effect on the ship's social structure. Fights would break out over the most trivial of food-related issues. A man accused of taking a slightly larger piece of meat, or of getting an extra splash of rum in his grog, could face the wrath of his messmates. The quartermaster's job of ensuring fair distribution became one of the most dangerous and stressful roles on the ship. He had to be perceived as impeccably fair, because any hint of favoritism could shatter the fragile peace of the crew. On a pirate ship, where every man felt entitled to his share, these disputes could be deadly. The sameness extends beyond the food. The visual landscape is unchanging: the same deck, the same rigging, the same grey-blue water stretching to the horizon in every direction. The sounds are the same: the creak of the timbers, the snap of the sails in the wind, the rhythmic crash of waves against the hull. Your brain, desperate for novelty, starts to play tricks on you. You'll see fleeting shapes in the waves or hear faint, imaginary sounds on the wind. The historical debate here is a quiet one, buried in the footnotes of naval history. How much did this crushing monotony contribute to the notorious indiscipline of sailors? We often hear about sailors going on wild benders the moment they hit port, spending months of wages in a few days of drink and debauchery. This is usually framed as a moral failing or a simple love of partying, but some historians argue it was a direct, explosive reaction to months of sensory and nutritional deprivation. The sailor wasn't just seeking pleasure, he was desperately seeking sensation. He wanted bright colors, loud noises, strong flavors, new faces, anything to break the soul-crushing sameness of the sea. The intensity of the release was directly proportional to the intensity of the deprivation that preceded it. As your scurvy worsens, this mental torment intensifies. Your lethargy makes it hard to focus. The days smear together into one long, grey continuum. You lose track of time. Was that yesterday or the day before that you saw the pod of dolphins? Has it been 5 weeks or 7 since you last saw in the ship's bell? Marking the watches is the only thing that gives the day any structure. You find yourself staring at your portion of food, not with hunger, but with a kind of philosophical exhaustion. This isn't just a bad meal. It is a symbol of your entrapment. Every bite is a reminder of your distance from the real world, the world of flavors and textures and life. You chew the tough meat, your sore gums protesting, and you feel a despair that is deeper than the ocean itself. It is the despair of a man who has forgotten what it feels like to truly taste life. Just when you think things cannot possibly get any worse, the wind dies. One morning, you wake up to a strange and unsettling silence. The constant creaking of the ship's timbers has softened. The rhythmic rush of waves against the hull has faded to a gentle lapping, and the powerful snap of the sails is gone. You go on deck and find the sea serpent sitting motionless on a sea of glassy, undisturbed water. The sails hang limp and useless from the masts. You are becalmed. You have drifted into the doldrums, a region near the equator notorious for its light, fickle winds. For a sailing ship, it is a death trap. All the forward momentum is gone. The ship is no longer a vessel on a journey, it is a floating, stationary prison, adrift at the mercy of the currents. At first, the men are patient. The wind will come back, they say. It always does. But a day passes, then 2, then a week. The sun is relentless, beating down from a cloudless sky. The deck planks become hot enough to burn your bare feet. With no wind, there is no relief from the oppressive, suffocating heat. The air below decks becomes a stagnant, suffocating soup of body odor and despair. And the food, which was already in a state of decay, now begins to rot with terrifying speed. The heat turns the ship's hold into an oven, accelerating every chemical and biological process. The water is the first to go from bad to catastrophic. The algae in the casks, supercharged by the heat and sun, blooms with explosive growth. The water is no longer just green-tinged, it is a thick, opaque, foul-smelling sludge. It's like trying to drink from a stagnant pond. The rum in the grog can no longer mask the taste, it just creates a bizarre, alcoholic slime that makes you gag with every sip. Water rations are cut to the bare minimum, just enough to prevent immediate dehydration. Your lips crack, your head pounds, and a constant, maddening thirst becomes your new reality. The remaining salted meat succumbs to the heat. The bowels that were still good now begin to turn. The cook opens one to find the contents have taken on a soft, putrid texture and a truly stomach-turning stench. The spices can't hide this level of decay. The meat is quietly and grimly dumped overboard, a sacrifice to the unforgiving sun. Your protein source is now gone. The hard deck, your final line of defense against starvation, becomes a battlefield. The weevils, thriving in the warmth, multiply at an exponential rate. The biscuits are now more insect than flour, crumbling into a dusty, writhing mass in your hands. There's no point in knocking them anymore, they are a cohesive, living entity. You eat the crawling crumbs because there is nothing else. This is a scenario that haunted every sailor. Being becalmed was a unique kind of hell. A ship in a storm might sink, but at least the end would be quick. A ship in the doldrums died a slow, agonizing death, with the crew as helpless witnesses. A little-known aspect of being becalmed was the psychological effect of the stillness. Sailors were used to the constant motion of the ship, the rocking and swaying that they learned to live with and even sleep through. The sudden, absolute lack of movement was deeply unnerving. It felt unnatural, wrong. The silence, broken only by the groans of thirsty men and the buzz of flies, was maddening. Tempers frayed. The fragile social contract of the ship began to tear apart. Men who had been comrades for months now eyed each other with suspicion and hostility over a mouthful of water or a handful of weevil dust. Historians still debate the role of these comms in the history of mutiny. While mutinies had many causes, brutal captains, unpaid wages, Desperation, the extreme pressure cooker of being becalmed, was often the final spot, when a crew is starving, thirsty, and sees no hope of escape. The authority of the captain and quartermaster can evaporate like the morning dew. A man with a desperate plan, any plan, can suddenly find a willing audience. Was the decision to mutiny a rational choice, or an act of collective madness brought on by heat, thirst, and despair? It's a question that delves deep into the psychology of survival. Your own scurvy is advancing rapidly. Your teeth feel loose in their sockets. Your joints scream with pain, and dark, ugly bruises appear on your legs from the slightest bump. The lethargy is absolute. You have no energy to work, to talk, to even think. You lie on the hot deck in whatever sliver of shade you can find, your mind a hazy fog of thirst and pain. You stare out at the glassy, indifferent sea. It looks like a mirror, reflecting the merciless, white-hot sky. The horizon offers no hope, no sign of wind, no hint of a sail. The ship is a coffin, and you are being slowly baked alive in it. The dream of pirate adventure is a sick, distant joke. You didn't come here for this. You came to gold, for freedom. Instead, you have found a slow, lingering death in a silent, sun-bleached hell. You close your eyes, your cracked lips whispering a prayer, not for gold, but for a single gust of wind. As the days become stretched into a sun-scorched eternity, your sources of food have dwindled to almost nothing. The rotten meat is gone. The water is undrinkable sludge, and the hardtack is a memory of crawling dust. It is in this state of extreme desperation that the crew begins to look for sustenance in the most unlikely of places. The quartermaster, his authority now hanging by a thread, orders a full search of the ship's cargo hold for anything that might be edible, buried deep in the hold, under a pile of damp sailcloth. They find it a small wooden crate that was part of some forgotten plunder. With trembling hands, they pry it open. Inside, nestled in straw, is a reel of cheese. A collective sigh of relief, weak and raspy, ripples through the gathered men. Cheese. It's real food. It's a miracle. The quartermaster takes the wheel, his face a grim mask of responsibility. It's not a large wheel, maybe 10 pounds at most. It will have to be rationed with extreme care. He takes his knife and cuts a small wedge for each mess. Your mess leader brings the wedge back to your group. You stare at it as if it were a solid gold ingot. It's a hard, aged cheese, something like a cheddar or a Gloucester. It's dark yellow, almost orange, and it smells incredibly strong, sharp, pungent, and powerful. For the first time in what feels like a lifetime, you're about to eat something with a real, complex flavor. With great ceremony, the wedge is divided into 6 tiny, equal pieces. You take your piece, which is no bigger than your thumb, and hold it in your palm. You notice it has a slightly reddish tint in places, and the texture is a bit crumbly. You don't care. It's food. You bring the morsel to your lips and take a bite. The flavor explodes in your mouth. It's intensely sharp, salty, and nutty. It's the most incredible thing you have ever tasted. The richness of the fat coats your tongue. It's so powerful, so different from the bland, rotten flavors you've become accustomed to, that it almost brings tears to your eyes. But as you chew the precious mouthful, you notice something else. A strange, wriggling sensation on your tongue, and a crunch. Not the hard crunch of a biscuit, but a soft, popping crunch. You spit the remaining piece into your hand and look at it closely. The reddish parts of the cheese are not part of the cheese at all. They are a teeming, writhing mass of tiny, red worms. And what you thought were crumbs are actually hordes of microscopic, white cheese mites. Your miracle food is infested. The cheese is alive. The creatures you are seeing are likely cheese mites, which thrive on aged cheeses, and the larvae of the cheese fly. The cheese fly would lay its eggs in the rind, and the larvae, known as cheese skippers for their ability to jump when disturbed, would burrow into the cheese, digesting it and breaking it down. Their digestive process is what gives certain infested cheeses, like the Sardinian Casomazzu, their characteristic sharp flavor and soft texture. To some, this is a delicacy. To you, it is a new circle of hell. Here we find one of history's truly bizarre and stomach-turning food facts. The consumption of mite-infested cheese was not always seen as a problem. In some parts of Europe, cheeses like Milbenkäse mite cheese in Germany and Mimolette in France are traditionally made with cheese mites. The mites are intentionally introduced to nibble on the rind, and their activity is said to contribute to the cheese's unique flavor and aroma. The red dust you see is the accumulated mass of live mites, their exoskeletons, and their excrement. It's an acquired taste, to say the least. You look around at the other men. Some have thrown their pieces down in disgust, but most, including the veteran Silas, are chewing slowly, their eyes closed, savoring the flavor despite the infestation. More protein, Silas croaks, his voice hoarse from thirst. He even scrapes up the red dust from the table and licks it off his finger. The debate, which would never happen in a real academic setting but is raging in your mind right now, is a question of pure revulsion. What is worse, the visible, black weevils in a bland biscuit, or the writhing, red worms and unseen mites in a flavorful cheese? The weevils were an invasion of your food. The worms and mites are an integral part of your food. Their digestive processes created the very flavor you just enjoyed. It's a deeply disturbing thought. The good taste and the disgusting reality are inextricably linked. You are faced with the same terrible choice as always: starve or swallow your revulsion. Your body is screaming for calories, for fat, for anything other than what it has been given. Your scurvy-ravaged body needs sustenance. With a shudder, you pick up the half-eaten, wriggling piece of cheese. You close your eyes, try to think only of the sharp, nutty flavor, and you put it back in your mouth. You chew quickly and swallow, trying not to think about the popping, wriggling texture. It's in your stomach, a small, precious lump of fat and protein in living creatures. It's a disgusting, horrifying meal, and it might just be the thing that keeps you alive for one more day. The become days have finally broken, giving way to a weak but steady wind that is now pushing the sea serpent slowly, agonizingly, toward the West Indies. The ordeal in the doldrums has left the crew shattered. Scurvy is rampant, morale is non-existent, and the discovery of the living cheese has been one of the final blows to your collective sanity. There is almost nothing left to eat. But there is, however, something left to drink. Beer. In the deepest, coolest part of the hold, there are still a few casks of the ship's beer. In the early days of the voyage, it was a welcome alternative to the water, a source of calories and relative safety. It was a weak, malty brew, more of a liquid bread than an intoxicant. Now, with the water utterly putrid and food supplies gone, the quartermaster orders the last of the beer to be broached. A cask is hoisted onto the deck. The men gather around, their tin cups held out with a pathetic eagerness. This is it, the last potable liquid on the ship, other than the carefully guarded rum. The bung is knocked out, and the cooks make attempts to fill the first cup from the spigot. But what comes out is not the familiar, frothy, brownish liquid you remember. It's a thin, vinegary, foul-smelling fluid, with a cloudy, yellowish appearance. It dribbles from the tap with a disgusting fizz. A cup is filled and handed to the nearest man. He brings it to his lips, takes a sip, and immediately spits it out, cursing. It's sour. It's turned to vinegar. The beer has gone bad. Every single cask. The entire remaining supply is now sour. Acidic mess that is completely undrinkable. A wave of despair, more profound than any before, washes over the crew. It feels like the ship itself is actively trying to kill you, turning every last source of comfort and sustenance into another form of poison. What has happened in these barrels is a simple, natural process. The beer, like the ship's water, was not sterile. It contained wild yeast and bacteria. One of these bacteria, Asectobacter, is a microorganism that consumes alcohol and, in the presence of oxygen, converts it into acetic acid, the primary component of vinegar. In the warm, slushing conditions of the ship's hold, with oxygen inevitably seeping into the wooden casks over time, the Asectobacter went to work. They consumed the alcohol in the weak beer and transformed your last hope for a decent drink into a barrel of low-grade, stinking vinegar. This process was a constant risk for any beer stored for long periods, which is one of the reasons why stronger, more alcoholic beverages like rum and fortified wine became more popular for long voyages. The higher alcohol content made them more resistant to this kind of bacterial spoilage. Here's a quirky, little-known fact about this sour beer: it wasn't always thrown away. While you couldn't drink it, it still had its uses. A clever cook or quartermaster knew that this ship made vinegar, as foul as it was, could be used for cleaning. The acidity made it effective for cutting through the grease on cooking pots or for scrubbing stains from the deck. More importantly, it was used for pickling. If the ship was lucky enough to catch a large amount of fish, the vinegar could be used to pickle the flesh, preserving it for a few more days or weeks. It was a desperate, thrifty way of turning one spoiled provision into a tool for preserving another. From decay, a new form of preservation was born. The historical discussion here is about the evolution of naval beverages. For centuries, beer was the standard drink for English sailors. It was safer than water and provided calories. Ships would leave port with enormous quantities of it, but its tendency to spoil, as you've just witnessed, was a massive logistical headache. This led to a gradual shift, first to stronger beers, then to wine, especially on French and Spanish ships, and finally, with the rise of the Caribbean sugar colonies, to rum. Was rum's dominance due to its potent psychoactive effects, its cheapness, or simply because it was the most stable, reliable beverage that could survive a long, hot voyage without turning into something disgusting? The answer is likely all three. Rum didn't just win the battle for the sailor's heart, it won the war against microbes. You stand on the deck, your empty cup in hand, and watch as the crew, under the quartermaster's grim order, begins to dump the sour beer overboard. The vinegary stench fills the air as cask after cask is emptied into the sea. It's a heartbreaking sight. It's not just beer they are pouring away, it's thousands of calories. It's a potential source of hydration. It's the last buffer you had against absolute starvation. Now there is nothing, no food. The water is poison. The beer is vinegar. The only things left are the dregs of the rum and the tattered scraps of your own hope. The ship sails on, but the men on board are wasting away. Your body is screaming for fuel, and the ship has nothing left to give. You are now forced to look at the fabric of the ship itself, at its non-human inhabitants. As a potential last meal, the sour beer has been dumped overboard, a final, stinking testament to your failed provisions. The ship is a barren wasteland. The hold is empty, the barrels are dry, and the men are gaunt shadows of their former selves. Hollow-eyed with hunger and advanced scurvy, the gnawing emptiness in your stomach has become a constant, physical pain. It is in this profound state of desperation that the definition of food begins to warp and expand in horrifying ways. Your gaze, and the gaze of every other man on board, starts to fall upon the other inhabitants of the ship. Not the weevils, you've already crossed that bridge, but the larger, furrier residents, the rats. Every wooden ship in history has had a population of rats. They came aboard with the cargo, hid in the dark corners of the hold, and bred with astonishing speed. For most of the voyage, they were a nuisance, a pest that occasionally got into the supplies. But now, they are no longer pests. They are meat. A grim hunt begins. Men who barely have the energy to stand now find a reserve of desperate strength to set traps. They use scraps of leather for bait, or even a precious crumb of the mite-infested cheese. They lie in wait in the darkness of the hold, armed with belaying pins and knives, their eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. One of the men in your mess succeeds. He emerges from the hold holding a large, grey rat by its tail. He has a triumphant, yet slightly mad, look in his eyes. He has brought back a prize. Instead of disgust, you feel a sharp pang of jealousy. The cook, Peg-Leg Pete, takes the rat. There is a grim professionalism to his actions. He skins it and guts it with a few deft movements of his knife, just as a butcher on land would handle a rabbit. The tiny, skinned carcass is then dropped into a pot of boiling seawater, along with the rat scot by other crew members. This was a depressingly common reality for starving sailors. Eating rats was not a sign of madness, it was a sign of extreme, but rational, desperation. When all other food is gone, a source of fresh protein and fat, no matter how repulsive, becomes a life-saving treasure. A little-known and rather grim detail of this practice involves the ship's cat. Most ships kept a cat or two, not as pets, but as professional rat catchers. A good ship's cat was a valued member of the crew. But when the human crew began to starve, the cat's role changed. It went from being the hunter to being the hunted. The very animal that was supposed to control the rat population was often one of the last meals on a truly desperate ship. It's a dark, ironic twist in the story of survival at sea. Later, the stew is served. It's a thin, watery broth with a few small, raised pieces of meat floating in it. You are given your portion. You stare into the bowl. The meat is stringy and pale. You can see the tiny rib bones. Your stomach rebels at the thought of what you are about to do. But your hunger is a far more powerful force. You lift a spoonful to your mouth. The broth is salty. And the meat? Well, the meat tastes like meat. It's a bit gummy, a bit stringy, but it's unmistakably animal tissue. It's protein. It's fat. It's life. You chew the small morsel carefully, making it last. It's the first fresh meat you've tasted in months, even if it is from a rat. The historical debate here is a subtle one, concerning the nutritional value versus the risk. Did eating rats actually help? Or did it do more harm than good on one hand? Rats provided desperately needed calories and protein, and since they were fresh, they contained trace amounts of vitamins that were absent in the salted meat and hardtack. Some sailors even anecdotally claimed that eating rats could stave off the worst effects of scurvy, though this is medically unlikely. On the other hand, ship's rats were notoriously filthy creatures, carriers of a host of diseases, including, most famously, the plague, though that was more a function of the fleas they carried. By eating them, were sailors ingesting pathogens that could cause dysentery or other illnesses in their already weakened bodies. It was a terrible gamble. Was the short-term gain of a few calories worth the long-term risk of a new, deadly infection for a starving man? The answer was almost always yes. You finish your portion of rats too. You can feel the small amount of energy it provides. A tiny spark in the cold emptiness of your belly. It's a grotesque meal. A new low in a journey defined by new lows. But it has pushed the specter of starvation back, if only for a few hours. The hunt continues. The rat population of the sea serpent is about to face a sudden and catastrophic decline. The men, once the unwilling hosts of these pests, have now become their greatest predators. You have crossed another psychological barrier. You have hunted, cooked, and eaten a creature universally associated with filth and disease. The line between what is a man and what is a desperate animal has become terrifyingly thin. The rats too, as grim as it was, provided a temporary reprieve, but it was not a cure. It was a single meal in a sea of nutritional emptiness. The relentless march of scurvy, which had been progressing steadily, now accelerates into its horrifying final stages. The disease is no longer a collection of uncomfortable symptoms, it is a full-blown assault on the integrity of your body. The weariness you felt before has now become a paralytic lethargy. You can barely muster the strength to get out of your hammock. Your world has shrunk to the few feet of grimy deck space where you lie, listening to the groans of the other sick men. At least a third of the crew is now completely incapacitated. The state of your mouth is terrifying. Your gums are no longer just swollen and purple, they are black, spongy, and necrotic, hiding them completely in a mass of rotting flesh. A foul, coppery smell emanates from your mouth. The stench of decay, eating is an agony. Chewing the toughest, weevil-filled crumbs of hardtack is impossible. Your teeth, their sockets dissolved by the lack of collagen, are so loose you could pull them out with your fingers. Some of the men have already lost several. Your skin is a roadmap of the disease. The dark bruises, which sailors called scurvy bumps, now cover your legs and arms. They appear with no injury, deep, dark, and painful to the touch. Your skin is sallow and dry. The slightest scratch, instead of healing, widens into an open, weeping sore, and in the crudest trick of the disease, old wounds from years past, a sword cut on your arm, a deep gash on your leg spontaneously reopen, the scar tissue dissolving as if the original injury had just occurred. Your body is literally unhealing itself, coming apart at the seams. This catastrophic failure of the body's repair mechanisms is the hallmark of advanced scurvy. Collagen is the scaffolding for all tissue. Without it, blood vessels become brittle and burst, leading to the spontaneous bruising and internal bleeding. Wounds cannot close. Bone fractures, long healed, can break along the original line. It is a complete and systemic collapse. A little known and particularly dreadful symptom of late-stage scurvy is what was known as Calentor. This was a form of delirium, a feverish madness that would overcome the sickest sailors. A man suffering from Calentor would, in his delirium, imagine that the flat, blue sea was a beautiful, green field. He would cry out with joy, declaring his intention to go for a walk amongst the flowers, and before anyone could stop him, he would leap overboard to his death. It was a final, tragic hallucination, the brain's last, desperate attempt to escape the hell of the ship. You lie on the deck, drifting in and out of a feverish state. Your joints are swollen to the point of immobility. You can feel a rattling in your chest when you breathe, a sign of internal bleeding in the lungs. You are dying. It is no longer a question of if, but when. The historical debate around scurvy's mortality rate is complex. How many sailors who died at sea and were recorded as having succumbed to the flux, fever, or consumption were actually in the final stages of scurvy? Their immune systems so compromised that any secondary infection became fatal. Many historians argue that the official death tolls from scurvy are likely a significant underestimate. Scurvy was the great underlying condition, the disease that turned a common cold into pneumonia, a small infection into deadly gangrene. It was the master executioner, but it often wore another disease's mask. The healthy members of the crew, a dwindling number, do what they can. They bring you sips of the foul water and try to force a few morsels of food into your rotting mouth. But there is a distance in their eyes. They are tending to the dead and the dying. The sea serpent has become a charnel house, a floating infirmary adrift on the waves. The mood on the ship is one of profound, funeral silence, broken only by the pained groans of the sick and the creaking of the ship itself. You close your eyes. The pain is immense, but it is the despair that is truly crushing. You think of the tavern where you signed the articles. The promise of gold and freedom seems like a hallucination from another life, as unreal as the green fields of Calentor. You think of the life you left behind, the hard labor, the poverty. It was a miserable existence, but it was life. You would give all the phantom treasure in the world to be back in that damp room, eating a stale loaf of bread. You feel a profound sense of futility. You survived the storms, the crushing labor, the putrid food, the doldrums, the rats too. You endured it all, only to be brought down by an invisible enemy. A slow, internal decay caused by the lack of a simple piece of fruit. It is a pathetic, ignominious end. You lie on the deck, a dying pirate on a dying ship, waiting for the end to come. You are drifting in the hazy twilight between consciousness and death. The pain from your swollen joints and rotting gums is a distant, throbbing hum. The world is a blur of hot deck planks and blinding blue sky. You are no longer waiting for death, you are simply experiencing it in slow motion. Then, a sound cuts through the fog. A shout from the crow's nest. It's not the dreaded cry of sail ho, which would mean a battle you cannot possibly fight. It's something else. The cracked, incredulous yell. Something in the water, else to pull it down. The words barely register at first, but then there's a stir on deck. The few men still able to walk are stumbling towards the rail. Their voices a low murmur of excitement. With a monumental effort, you pull yourself up, your vision swimming. You crawl a few feet to the side of the ship and peer over. There, floating serenely on the surface of the impossibly blue water, is a creature of immense size. It's a sea turtle, a giant leatherback. Its dark carapace glistening in the sun like a huge, wet stone. It is simply resting, basking in the warmth, completely unaware of the floating charnel house that is drifting towards it. In that moment, a primal, electric energy surges through the ship. This is not a rat. This is not a worm-eaten piece of cheese. This is a mountain of fresh meat. It is a divine intervention. It is salvation. The captain, his own face pale and his lips cracked, gives the order. Lower the jolly boat. Men who were lying prostrate on the deck moments ago, seemingly at death's door, find a reserve of strength they did not know they possessed. Adrenaline, the most powerful drug of all, courses through their veins. They move with a clumsy, desperate urgency. The small boat is lowered into the water with a splash. For men, the strongest of the weak, tumble into it, their hands shaking as they grab the oars. You watch, your heart pounding against your ribs. The boat rows towards the turtle, which is now aware of the approaching threat. It begins to swim, but, on the surface, it is slow and cumbersome. The chase is agonizingly slow. A strange ballet of a lumbering giant and a boat full of skeletons. They manage to get a rope around one of its massive flippers. The turtle panics, diving and pulling the small boat with it. The men hang on, their knuckles white, their bodies screaming in protest. It is a battle between profound life and profound desperation. Slowly, painfully, they tire the great creature out. They manage to get more ropes around it and begin the Herculean task of towing it back to the sea serpent. Getting it on board is another epic struggle, requiring every last ounce of the crew's collective strength. But finally, with a great, heaving groan, they haul the massive animal over the rail and onto the deck, where it lands with a heavy, fleshy thud. The crew lets out a weak, ragged cheer. They have done it. They have captured life itself. This was the great bounty of the tropical seas. Giant sea turtles and manatees, often called sea cows, were a lifeline for starving crews. A large turtle could provide hundreds of pounds of meat, fat, and eggs, and here we find a remarkable, if cruel, piece of sailor ingenuity, the living larder. They would flip the captured turtle onto its back. In this position, it was immobilized and, for reasons they didn't understand, could stay alive for weeks. The crew could butcher the animal a piece at a time, ensuring a supply of fresh meat for a prolonged period. The ship now had a living, breathing pantry lying on its deck. The cook, Peg Leadbeat, approaches the turtle with a reverence usually reserved for a holy relic. He is no longer a trickster hiding rot, he is a high priest about to perform a sacred rite. His axe falls, and the butchering begins. The crew is silent, watching with hypnotic intensity. He separates the different kinds of meat, the dark, beef-like muscle and the lighter, fattier parts. He carefully removes the liver and other organs. He scoops out the greenish, gelatinous fat from under the shell, the famous Collie passioned Collie pea, considered great delicacies. He even finds a clutch of leathery eggs inside. Nothing will be wasted. Soon, the ship's galley is fired up for the first time in what feels like an eternity. The smell of cooking meat, fresh and savory, fills the air. It is the most beautiful smell in the world. Rich, nourishing broth is prepared. a turtle soup that is less a recipe and more a holy elixir. The historical debate here concerns the true source of the turtle's miraculous curative powers against scurvy. Was it simply the morale boost and the calories from fresh meat that gave men the strength to hang on, or was there a more direct biochemical reason? Modern science tells us that organ meats, particularly the liver, as well as the fattened eggs, contain small but vital amounts of vitamin C. The sailors wouldn't have known this, but by consuming the entire animal, they were inadvertently ingesting the very nutrient they were dying for. Historians still discuss whether the turtle's reputation as a scurvy fighter was a lucky coincidence of whole animal consumption, or if there was an intuitive, unscientific understanding that these parts of the animal were the most life-giving. The first cup of hot broth is handed to you. It's so hot it burns your lips, but you don't care. You sip it. The flavor is rich, complex, and deeply savory. It's a taste of life. You can feel the warmth spreading through your chest. Pushing back the cold lethargy, you are given a small piece of the cooked meat. It is tender and delicious. You chew it slowly, your sore gums protesting, but the nourishment it promises is worth the pain. For the first time in months, a sliver of real hope returns to the sea serpent. It's not the promise of gold. It's the promise of another sunrise. The turtle on the deck is more than just food, it's a reprieve from your death sentence. The turtle has worked a miracle. The daily rations of fresh meat and nourishing broth have had a stunning effect on the crew. The spectre of death has receded. The men who were on the verge of dying are now sitting up, the color returning to their faces. Your own recovery is slow but undeniable. The swelling in your gums has gone down. The deep bruises on your legs are starting to fade, and a flicker of energy has returned to your weary limbs. The ship is no longer a floating coffin, it's a convalescent ward, with bellies full of fresh meat for the first time in an age. The mood on the ship lifts. The men talk. They joke. They even manage a weak sea shanty while performing their duties. And the talk, as always, turns to food. But no, it's not the desperate, hallucinatory talk of starvation. It's the appreciative, connoisseur-like talk of men who have just had a truly fine meal. One of the older sailors, a man who has sailed these Caribbean waters for decades, smacks his lips after finishing his portion of turtle steak. It's good, he declares. Damn good. But it's not lamb. A younger sailor, still new to these waters, looks up, confused. Lamb, what are you talking about? Silas, there's no sheep out here. Silas gets a far-off look in his eyes. Ugh, but there is. The sea lamb, the mouton de mer, as the Frenchies call it. Now that is the finest meal a man can have on these waters. Makes this turtle taste like hardtack. This sparks a lively debate among the crew. What is this mysterious sea lamb? Is it real? The older sailors insist it is, describing it in rapturous terms. They speak of a meat so tender, so flavorful, that it rivals the finest lamb from the green hills of England. They describe hunting it in shallow, clear water bays, and feasting on it, roasted over an open fire on a sandy beach. Their descriptions are so vivid, so full of sensory detail, that your mouth begins to water, even though you just ate. This sea lamb, or mouton de mer, is one of the more charming and persistent mysteries of pirate and naval lore. What were they actually talking about? The term appears in various journals and accounts from the 17th and 18th centuries, always described as a delectable meat found in the Caribbean, but its exact identity is the subject of a very real, if low stakes, historical debate. The most likely candidate is the manatee. These large, slow-moving, herbivorous marine mammals were once abundant in the coastal waters of the Caribbean. Their meat was said to be mild and fatty, with different parts of the animal supposedly tasting like beef, pork, or veal. When roasted, it could have a texture and flavor profile that, to a sailor starved for variety, might have resembled high-quality terrestrial meat like lamb. The manatee's gentle nature and slow speed would have made it relatively easy prey for pirates in a small boat. Another theory suggests they were talking about a specific type of large fish. Some have proposed the Goliath grouper, a massive fish whose firm, white flesh could be compared to an ant animal. Others suggest a large parrotfish, whose beak-like mouth could, with a bit of imagination, look like a grazing animal's. A more obscure, but fascinating, possibility is that they were referring to the Arawak or Taino names for local fauna, which were then crudely translated by European sailors. The native peoples of the Caribbean had their own rich culinary traditions, and it's possible the pirates were simply adopting a local term for a creature they enjoyed eating. The debate hinges on interpreting the vague, often romanticized descriptions left behind by sailors who were more concerned with filling their bellies than with precise zoological classification. Was sea lamb a specific species? Or was it a catch-all term for any large, delicious, and easily caught sea creature that wasn't a fish or a turtle to this day? Food historians and maritime enthusiasts argue about it. The lack of a definitive answer is what makes the mystery so appealing. It's a small, tantalizing blank spot on the culinary map of the golden age of piracy. On the deck of the Sea Serpent, the debate is passionate. The men who claim to have eaten sea lamb are treated with a new respect. They are the keepers of a secret knowledge, the veterans of a gastronomic adventure the rest of you can only dream of. The possibility that there is something out there even better than the turtle you are currently feasting on fills the crew with a renewed sense of purpose. The search for gold is still the ultimate goal, but a new, more immediate quest has taken hold: the hunt for the legendary mouton d'Air. The sailors scan the horizon not just for merchant ships, but for the shallow, mangrove-lined bays where this mythical beast might be found. The turtle saved your lives, but the idea of the sea lamb has saved your spirits. It has reintroduced the concept of desire, of aspiration, into your world. You are no longer just trying to survive, you are hoping to feast. And in the bleak world of a pirate, the hope of a good meal can be as powerful a motivator as the hope of a full treasure chest. The turtle has been consumed, down to the last scrap of meat and sinew. Its empty shell, a monument to your salvation, was unceremoniously tipped overboard. The small boost of nutrients has worked wonders, pulling the crew back from the brink. The scurvy is in retreat, but hunger is a persistent ghost, and it is beginning to haunt the ship once more. The rats are gone, the bugs and the remaining biscuit dust are a meager snack, and the mythical sea lamb has not materialized. You are functional again, but you are still starving. The gnawing emptiness in your belly has returned. The crew grows quiet and listless. The brief period of hope is fading, replaced by the familiar, cold dread of starvation. It is time for the final, most desperate act of culinary innovation. Your eyes, and the eyes of the crew, begin to fall on the very fabric of the ship itself. Not the wood or the metal, but the leather. There is leather everywhere on a sailing ship. There are strips of it wrapped around the oars for grip. There are leather buckets for bailing water. There are belts, knife sheaths, and old, worn-out shoes. In the past, you would have seen these objects as tools. Now, you see them as a potential meal. The decision is made not by the captain, but by a kind of grim, unspoken consensus. A sailor takes off his own shoes. They are old and cracked, stiff with salt and sweat. The soles worn almost completely through. He takes his knife and begins to cut the upper part of the shoe into thin strips. The leather is tough and dry, and it takes a great deal of effort. He takes these strips to the galley, where Peg-Leg Pete looks on with a weary resignation. This is the last resort. The leather strips are dropped into a cauldron of boiling seawater. The plan is simple, born of pure desperation to boil the leather until it softens, until the tough, cross-linked collagen fibers break down into a digestible, gelatinous state. The smell that rises from the pot is not a food smell. It's the odor of a tannery. A pungent, chemical smell mixed with the faint, unpleasant aroma of old sweat. It is a nauseating perfume. The stew boils for hours, the water turning a murky brown. The cook periodically prods the leather strips with a long fork. They are slowly, almost imperceptibly, softening. This horrific practice, often called eating shoe leather, is a recurring theme in the darkest tales of survival. From desperate sailors to starving armies and lost pioneers, it is the absolute final frontier of famine. Leather is made from animal hide, which is primarily collagen. In theory, it is a source of protein, but the tanning process, which turns hide into durable leather, uses chemicals like tannin from tree bark that are designed to make the collagen resistant to decay and digestion. You are essentially trying to eat something that has been chemically engineered to be inedible. A lesser known and even more desperate version of this was to eat the ship's candles. Candles of the era were often made from tallow, which is rendered animal fat. While not pleasant, tallow is pure calories. A starving man would gnaw on a tallow candle as if it were a piece of fruit, the waxy fat coating his mouth but providing a vital burst of energy. The problem was that many candles were also made of beeswax, which is largely indigestible. A man would have to know his candle. The historical debate around this practice is one of viability. Was eating leather a genuine survival strategy, or was it a placebo? An act of desperation that provided more comfort than actual nutrition. Some historians and survival experts argue that unless boiled for an extremely long time, the leather would provide very few usable calories. The energy expended in digesting the tough, chemically treated material might be greater than the energy it provides. Others argue that in a state of absolute starvation, even a tiny net gain of calories, or the simple act of putting something in your stomach, could be enough to keep a person alive for another day. It represents a line where the human body begins to consume itself, and any external fuel, no matter how poor, might slow that process. After what feels like an entire day of boiling, the leather soup is ready. The cook fishes out the strips of boiled shoe. They are no longer stiff, they are limp, swollen, and slimy, like some kind of grotesque brown sea creature. A strip is plopped into your bowl, along with a ladle of the murky, foul-smelling broth. You stare at it. This was a shoe, an object you walked on, an object that protected your feet from the filth of the docks. And now it is your dinner. Your hunger is so profound, so all-consuming, that it overrides your revulsion. You pick up the slimy strip of leather with your fingers. It's warm and disturbingly pliable. You put it in your mouth. The texture is rubbery and gelatinous. It's a struggle for your teeth to get through it. The taste is indescribable. It's a blend of salt, chemicals, and a faint, ghostly flavor of old feet. It's the most disgusting thing you have ever put in your mouth. You chew and chew, your jaw aching, until you can manage to swallow the rubbery morsel. It slides down your throat and lands in your stomach with a heavy, unnatural thud. You have eaten your shoe. You have reached the absolute bedrock of human survival. There is nowhere lower to go. This is not food. This is the negation of food. It is a symbol of total, catastrophic failure. You can only pray that you sight land, or a prize, before you are forced to start eating the sails. You are chewing on a boiled leather belt, a meal that provides more jaw ache than sustenance. When a thought strikes you, you look over at the ship's cook, Pete, who is stirring his foul cauldron with a grim expression. In this world of starvation and decay, where every man is just another hungry mouth, how has he survived? What is the status of the cook on a pirate ship? The role of the ship's cook, you realize, is one of profound paradox. He is, at once, one of the most protected and one of the most vulnerable men on board. His protection comes from his essential, irreplaceable function. While the ship has plenty of men who can fight, haul ropes, or navigate, there is usually only one man with the skill and experience to manage the galley. The cook knows how to make the rock-hard biscuit barely edible, how to leach the salt from the salt horse, and, most importantly, how to make the rations stretch. He is the master of the ship's sustenance. To harm the cook is to threaten the belly of every man on board. Therefore, cooks were often exempt from the most dangerous duties, like fighting in a boarding party or working high in the rigging during a storm. This is why the job was often given to an older sailor or a man who had already been maimed in battle. Like Pete with his wooden leg, he could no longer fight, but he could still serve the crew. This is the origin of the classic pirate cook with a wooden leg trope. It's based in simple, practical reality. He is also the keeper of secrets. He knows which barrel of meat is starting to turn, which cask of water is the most foul, and where the last of the spices are hidden. This knowledge is power. The cook, along with the quartermaster, has the most intimate understanding of the ship's true condition, its level of hunger and desperation. However, this protected status is a double-edged sword. When the food is merely bad, salty, buggy, or monotonous, the crew grumbles but accepts it as their lot. But when the food runs out, or when the cook is perceived as being wasteful or incompetent, his protection evaporates. The man who was once essential becomes the focal point of all the crew's anger and frustration. A little-known aspect of the pirate articles, the code of conduct you signed, often dealt specifically with the cook. Some articles stated that if the cook was found to be cheating the men, skimming more than his fair share of the slush fund, for example, he could be severely punished. There are accounts, perhaps exaggerated but telling, of crews becoming so enraged by a cook's perceived laziness or filthiness that they would simply throw him overboard. The line between being the crew's savior and the crew's scapegoat was perilously thin. This leads to a fascinating historical question that is still debated among those who study the social dynamics of piracy. What was the true power structure in the galley? Was the cook an autocrat, ruling his fiery domain with an iron ladle? His word law when it came to provisions? Or was he more of a public servant, constantly under the scrutiny of the crew and the quartermaster? His every decision subject to challenge? The answer likely varied from ship to ship. A respected, skilled cook on a well-provisioned vessel probably wielded considerable informal authority. A lazy or untalented cook on a starving ship was likely the most terrified man on board, knowing that his life depended on his ability to create something from nothing. You watch Pete now as he portions out the slimy leather strips. He gives every man the exact same sized piece. His movements are deliberate, fair, and transparent. He knows he is being watched. Every eye is on him, touching, weighing. He is not just serving a meal, he is performing a ritual of fairness to keep the ship's fragile social order from collapsing into a cannibalistic free-for-all. His own portion is the same as everyone else's. He chews the tough, foul leather with the same grim determination as the rest of you. He is not exempt from the suffering, he is a participant in it. This shared misery is his greatest protection now. He is not the cook who is failing to provide, he is just another starving pirate, doing his best in an impossible situation. You swallow your piece of leather and look at Pete with a new understanding. His job is not to create delicious food. It is to manage decay. It is to stretch scarcity. And, most importantly, it is to maintain the illusion of fairness in a world that is anything but. He is a chemist, a magician, a diplomat, and a scapegoat, all rolled into one. And as long as he performs this complex role successfully, he gets to live another day. If he fails, he might very well become the next ingredient in the pot. You have been chewing on boiled leather for 3 days. Your jaw is in constant, grinding pain, and your stomach feels like it's filled with rocks. The ship has become a silent vessel of ghosts, the men too weak and despondent to even speak. Hope is a forgotten currency. Then, from the crow's nest, comes the cry that you have been simultaneously dreading and praying for. Sail ho. The voices are weak, but the words are electric. Every man who can stand stumbles to the rail. There, on the horizon, is a sail. It's not a warship. It's a fat, slow-moving merchant vessel. There in the water, her sails full. She is plowing through the waves, oblivious to the starving predators who have just spotted her. A jolt of pure, savage energy rips through the crew. This is it. This is the last chance. The captain, his voice a raspy croak, gives the orders. Men who were listless moments ago now fly to their stations. The sails are trimmed. The course is altered. The sea serpent, a ship of the dead, comes alive for one last, desperate hunt. Your own lethargy is burned away by a surge of adrenaline. You take your place at one of the cannons, your heart hammering in your chest. The thought of battle is terrifying, but the thought of what that ship represents is far more powerful. It doesn't represent gold, or silver, or jewels. It represents food. You imagine the cargo hold of that merchant ship. You picture barrels of fresh water, casks of wine, sacks of real flour, perhaps even of chickens or a pig. You imagine crates of fruit, cheese that doesn't crawl, bread that is soft. This vision is more potent than any treasure. You are not fighting for wealth, you are fighting for the right to eat a decent meal. This was the brutal reality behind the romance of pirate plunder. While the stories focus on chests of gold doubloons, the most valuable and eagerly sought-after loot was often the most mundane. A captured ship's provisions were its most precious treasure. Pirates would often value a cargo of Madeira wine or fresh meat far more highly than a cargo of textiles or raw materials, which were harder to sell. The sea serpent is faster and more agile than the merchantman. You gain on her quickly. You raise the black flag. The stark white skull and crossbones a promise of no quarter if they resist. A warning shot is fired across her bow. This leads to a subtle but important historical debate: how violent was the golden age of piracy? Really, the popular image is one of constant, bloody battles, with swords clashing and cannons roaring. While these battles certainly happened, many pirates preferred to take a prize without a fight. The pirate flag itself was a two-love psychological warfare, designed to terrify a merchant crew into immediate surrender. A merchant crew was made up of professional sailors, not soldiers. They were poorly paid and had no financial stake in the cargo they were transporting. Why would they risk their lives to defend their employer's property from a crew of desperate, bloodthirsty pirates in many cases? They wouldn't. A quick surrender meant they kept their lives. A fight meant almost certain death. As a result, a surprising number of pirate attacks were relatively bloodless affairs. In this case, however, the merchant captain decides to run. A chase ensues, and your cannon fires in earnest. A lucky shot takes out their mainmast. The ship wallows, crippled and helpless. The order is given to board. You swarm over the rails, a horde of screaming, emaciated madmen. The merchant crew, seeing the wild, starved look in your eyes, throws down their arms immediately. The ship is yours. But no one goes for the captain's strong cops. No one searches the officers' cabins for valuables. Instead, the entire pirate crew, as one, makes a mad dash for the galley in the cargo hold. You yourself burst into the hold and see a sight more beautiful than any sunset: barrels, crates, and sacks, all neatly stowed. A man smashes open a crate with an axe. It's filled with oranges. Oranges, the cure for scurvy, the mythical fruit you have been dreaming of for months. Men fall upon the crate, grabbing the fruit, peeling it with shaking hands, and burying their faces in the sweet, acidic flesh, the juice running down their chins. Another barrel is opened. It's fresh water. Clean, clear, beautiful water. You fill your cup and drink, and drink, and drink. The cool liquid a balm to your parched soul. A lesser-known prize, but one that was highly valued, was a ship's surgeon and his medicine chest. While pirates might have their own sawbones, a captured surgeon from a wealthier vessel often had better tools and a supply of valuable medicines like laudanum, a tincture of opium, or quinine for treating malaria. The surgeon himself might be persuaded to join the pirate crew, his life spared in exchange for his skills. You grab an orange and bite into it, rind and all. The burst of flavor is overwhelming. It's sweet. It's sour. It's real. It's the taste of life returning. You see Silas, the old salt, weeping openly as he drinks a cup of fresh water. You see the cook, Pete, inspecting a side of freshly slaughtered pork with the eyes of a true artist. The battle is over. The prize is taken. And the treasure is better than you could have ever imagined. It's not gold, it's food. And tonight, for the first time in an eternity, you will feast. The captured merchant ship, now your prize, is a floating paradise. The initial, frantic gorging has subsided into a state of blissful, satiated calm. For 2 days, you have done nothing but eat, drink, and sleep. You have feasted on roasted pork, devoured oranges by the dozen, and drunk clear, fresh water until you felt bloated. The effect has been transformative. The fog of scurvy is lifting from your mind. The sores on your skin are beginning to heal, and the strength is flowing back into your limbs. The captain and quartermaster decide that the sea serpent is too damaged done depleted to continue. The prize ship is seaworthy and, more importantly, full of supplies. The decision is made to transfer all men and valuable plunder to the new vessel and scuttle your old home. As the sea serpent is engulfed by the waves, you feel a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was a floating hill, but it was your hill. Your new destination is a place you've only heard about in hushed, excited whispers of Pirate Haven, a place like Nassau or a hidden cove in Madagascar, a sanctuary where the king's law doesn't reek, where pirates can safely land, repair their ships, and, most importantly, spend their plunder. After a week of steady sailing, you smell it before you see it, the smell of land. Not just the damp, limey smell of earth, but the smell of wood smoke, roasting meat, and humanity. Then you see it a sheltered bay, crowded with ships of all shapes and sizes. The shore is a chaotic jumble of makeshift buildings, tents, and open-air taverns. This is it, a pirate port. As your ship drops anchor, the feeling is overwhelming. You have survived. You have returned to the world of the living. The moment your feet touch the solid ground of the beach, you almost fall to your knees. The land doesn't move. It's a bizarre, disorienting sensation after so many months of the sea's constant motion. Your first thought is not of drink or women. Your first thought is of food, fresh food. You and your crewmates, clutching the first installment of your shares, a handful of silver coins from the merchant captain's strong cups, stumble towards the nearest open-air market. The sensory overload is incredible. The colors, the sounds, the smells. There are piles of brightly colored fruits you've never seen before: mangoes, papayas, pineapples. There are heaps of fresh vegetables, green and vibrant. The air is thick with the smoke from cooking fires, where whole fish are grilling and chunks of meat are roasting on spits. You walk up to a stall run by a local woman. You point, your hand shaking slightly, at a piece of fruit you now recognize as a pineapple. You hand her a silver coin, far more than its actual worth. But you don't care. She cuts a thick slice for you. You bring it to your mouth and take a bite. The flavor is an explosion. It's a complex symphony of sweet and tart, with a fibrous, juicy texture that is utterly alien and wonderful. It's nothing like the simple sweetness of the oranges. It's wild, exotic, and intoxicating. You devour the slice in seconds, the juice dripping down your arms. This first meal on shore was a hugely significant moment for a sailor. After months of a monotonous, rotten, and nutritionally bankrupt diet, the sudden influx of fresh, varied, and vitamin-rich food was a shock to the system. It was not just pleasurable, it was medicinal. This is where the final stages of scurvy would be cured, where a man's body could finally begin to properly heal itself. A little-known aspect of this shore-leave feasting was the danger of over-indulgence. A man whose stomach was accustomed to tiny portions of terrible food could become violently ill by suddenly gorging on rich, fatty, or acidic foods. The flux dysentery was rampant in these pirate ports, not just from poor sanitation, but from sailors' own abused digestive systems going into shock. A man could survive months of starvation at sea only to be laid low by his first glorious, gluttonous meal on land. The historical debate here concerns the nature of these pirate havens. Were they anarchic, violent hellholes, as often portrayed in fiction, or were they surprisingly functional, Self-governing communities with their own informal economies and social structures? The answer is likely a bit of both. Places like Nassau in the early 18th century were certainly chaotic and dangerous. But they were also vibrant hubs of trade. The pirates brought in plunder coin, raw goods, and enslaved people, and in return, they created a market for local farmers, fishermen, and merchants who could provide the food, drink, and services the pirates craved. It was a symbiotic, if volatile, relationship. These ports were a crucial part of the pirate ecosystem, the terrestrial base that made the life at sea possible. You and your crewmates move from stall to stall. A pack of hungry wolves set loose in a pantry. You eat grilled fish that flakes off the bone, savory meats too thick with vegetables, and handfuls of nuts and berries. You are not just sating your hunger, you are consciously trying to erase the memory of the past few months. You are trying to scrub the taste of weevils, rot, and leather from your soul with every new, delicious bite. This is the other side of the coin. This is the reward for the suffering. The feast is only possible because of the famine that preceded it. The intensity of the pleasure is directly proportional to the intensity of the pain you endured. You have earned this. Every delicious, life-affirming mouthful is a victory over the slow, grey death you so narrowly escaped. The first day on land was about healing and survival, a desperate rush to flood your system with the nutrients it craved. But now, with your scurvy in retreat and your belly full of real food, the second phase of shore leave begins. This is the part you dreamed of back in that filthy port tavern. This is the reward. This is the debauchery. The handful of silver coins from the initial division of plunder has been supplemented by your full share. The captured merchant cargo, the textiles, the sugar, the indigo has been sold or bartered away to the shady merchants who thrive in this pirate haven. The quartermaster has done the accounting. And now you are, for the first time in your life, a wealthy man. You have a leather pouch heavy with a mix of Spanish silver, English shillings, and French Louis d'or. It's more money than your father ever saw in his entire life. And you are about to spend it with reckless, explosive abandon. You and your crewmates, cleaned up and dressed in gaudy new clothes plundered from the prize ship, descend upon the town's largest tavern. It's a loud, sprawling, smoke-filled building, packed to the rafters with pirates from a dozen different ships. The air is thick with the sweet smell of rum and tobacco. The sound a chaotic symphony of shouting, laughter, and a fiddler in the corner sawing away at a frantic jig. You stride up to the bar and slap a silver coin down. Rum for me and all my mates. You roar, your voice filled with a newfound confidence. Mugs are filled with the finest, darkest from the island has to offer, not the rock-killed devil from the ship, but aged, smoother stuff. The first sip is a revelation. It's rich and complex, with notes of molasses, vanilla, and dope. It burns, but it's a pleasant, warming burn, not the harsh, chemical fire of the grog you're used to. You drink deeply, the potent spirit going straight to your head. And then comes the food. This is not the simple, restorative food of the market stalls. This is a feast of pure indulgence. The tavern keeper, well accustomed to the appetites of newly rich pirates, brings out platters piled high with roasted meats. There's a whole suckling pig, its skin crispy and crackling. There are roasted chickens, ducks, and thick cuts of beef, all dripping with fat and juices. There are savory pies, their crusts golden brown, filled with rich, spiced meat. You abandon all pretense of manners. You grab a pig's leg with your bare hands and tear into it. The hot, savory fat running down your chin. You eat until you are stuffed. Then you drink more rum and eat some more. This is a feast designed to be overwhelming. A sensory assault of fat, salt, sugar, and alcohol. It is the diametric opposite of the bland, decaying world you left behind at sea. This image of the pirate's feast is one of the most enduring in popular culture. But a little-known culinary detail often gets lost: the barbecue. The word barbecue itself has Caribbean root, derived from the Taino word barbacoa, which described a wooden frame used for slowly roasting meat over a fire. Pirates, spending time with learning from indigenous and local populations like the Taino people and escaped African slaves maroons, adopted this cooking method. A pirate barbecue was a huge social event, a way of celebrating a successful voyage. They would roast whole pigs or manatees, often basting them with spicy, citrus-based sauces. So the classic image of pirates feasting on a beach is not just a romantic fantasy, it's a reasonably accurate depiction of a real cultural and culinary tradition. The historical question here is an economic one. How did this cycle of plunder and profligacy actually work? Was it sustainable for the pirates? It was a boom and bust existence. A single rich prize could set a man up for months of lavish living. But the money was spent as quickly as it was earned. Pirates were notoriously bad at saving or investing. This wasn't just a character flaw, it was a rational response to their lifestyle, with a short life expectancy. What was the point of saving for a future you would likely never see? This live for today philosophy fueled the economies of these pirate havens, creating a constant, rapid circulation of wealth that attracted merchants, tavern keepers, and all manner of entrepreneurs willing to separate a pirate from his coin. The night descends into a blur of rum, food, and music. You gamble, losing a handful of coins and winning them back with a lucky roll of the dice. You sing sea shanties at the top of your lungs. Your arms slung around your crewmates, your brothers in starvation and in wealth. You feel invincible, immortal. The memory of the scurvy, the revels, the leather, it's a distant nightmare. Something that happened to another person in another life. You stumble out of the tavern into the warm, tropical night, the stars reeling overhead. The pouch at your belt is considerably lighter. But you don't care. The money is just fuel for the fire of the moment. You are a king for a day, a lord of misrule in a kingdom of outcasts. This is the promise that was made to you. This is the reason you endured the hell of the voyage. This fleeting, glorious, indulgent moment is your treasure. The glorious, rum-soaked blur of shore leave lasts for weeks, but it cannot last forever. Your pouch of silver, once so satisfyingly heavy, is now alarmingly light. The tavern keepers who once greeted you with open arms now give you calculating looks. The initial thrill of solid ground has worn off, replaced by a familiar restlessness. You are a man of the sea, and the land is starting to feel like a cage. The party winds down with the same inevitability as the tide going out. The captain and quartermaster, who have been busy overseeing repairs to your new ship and trying to recruit new hands to replace those lost to scurvy and desertion, put the word out it is time to sail again. You find yourself back down at the docks, the same place where your shore-leave adventure began. But the mood is different now. The frantic energy is gone, replaced by a sense of weary purpose. You watch as the new provisions are loaded aboard the ship, and your heart sinks. It's the same old story. Casks of fresh water, which you know will turn to green slime within a month. Huge barrels of salted beef, the familiar, unappetizing sight of grey meat packed in brine, and, of course, the massive sacks of flour, destined to be baked into the tooth dulling, weevil-spawning bricks of hardtack. It all looks so fresh now. The water is clear, the meat is just salty, and the flour is, for the moment, free of insects. But you are no longer the naive young man who boarded the sea serpent with dreams of adventure. You are a veteran. You know the dark future that awaits these supplies. You know the life cycle of rotten decay. You see a barrel of water, but you taste the slime. You see the salted pork, but you smell the rancid green meat it will become. You see the sacks of flour, and you can already feel the phantom crunch of weevils in your teeth. This moment is the great, unspoken tragedy of the pirate's life. It is an endless, brutal cycle. The horror of the sea is what makes the pleasure of the shore so intense. But the pleasure of the shore is fleeting, and it always leads back to the horror of the sea. There is no escape. You cannot stay on land, for you are an outlaw with a price on your head. And you cannot truly conquer the sea, because you can never conquer the fundamental problem of hunger and decay. A lesser-known aspect of this reprovisioning process was the slop chest. On naval and some merchant vessels, this was a store of clothing, tobacco, and other small necessities run by the captain. Sailors could buy items from the slop chest, but the cost would be deducted from their future wages, often at an inflated price. It was a source of profit for the captain and a source of debt for the crew, while pirate ships, with their egalitarian ethos, didn't typically operate this kind of exploitative system. The principle remained. The crew had to collectively invest some of their plunder back into the ship, buying the very supplies that would sustain and torment them on the next voyage. Your treasure, one at such great cost, was now being used to buy your next meal of hardtack and salt horse. The historical debate here is one of motivation. Why would anyone willingly sign up for this cycle again once a pirate had experienced the horrors of a long voyage? Why would he ever go back to sea? Some historians argue that for many, there was simply no choice. They were marked men, unable to return to respectable society. Piracy was the only life they could have. Others point to a form of addiction not just to alcohol, but to the lifestyle itself. They were addicted to the intense highs of the fight, the plunder, and the shore leave party. They were willing to endure the crushing lows of the voyage to get another taste of that high. It was a gambler's mentality, always hoping the next prize would be the big one that would let them retire, a prize that rarely came. You see a group of new recruits coming aboard. They are young, like you once were, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and excitement. They look at the provisions with indifference, their minds on the promise of gold and adventure. You see yourself in them, and you feel a profound sense of pity. They have no idea what they are signing up for. They don't know the story these barrels will tell. You take your place on the ship, your new home, and you feel a grim resignation settle over you. The party is over. The cycle is beginning anew. The anchor is weighed, the sails are set, and the ship points its nose towards the open, hungry sea. You watch the pirate haven, your brief paradise of flavor and sensation, shrink into the distance. You are sailing back into a world of grey monotony and slow decay, and you are doing it willingly. The question echoes in your mind, a question that has no easy answer: is it worth it? The ship sails on, a tiny, self-contained world of wooden rope, floating on an infinite sea. The routines, which you had almost forgotten during your time on land, come back to you with a grim familiarity. You stand your watch, you coil the ropes, you swab the deck, and you heat. You tap the weevils from your hardtack, you chew the tough, salty meat. You drink the grog that masks the taste of the slowly fouling water. Each meal is a ghost of a memory, a reminder of the horrors of the last voyage. But this time, there is a difference. You are no longer shocked. You are no longer naive. You are a seasoned professional in the art of enduring bad food. One evening, you are sitting with your messmates below deck. A new recruit, one of the fresh-faced boys who signed on at the last port, gags as he tries to swallow a piece of rancid, heavily spiced pork. He looks at you, his eyes wide with horror and disbelief. "How can you eat this?" he whispers, his voice trembling. You look down at your own bowl. You look at the grey, stringy meat swimming in the greasy, pepper-laden broth. You look back at the boy, and you simply shrug. You get used to it, you say, and the terrifying part is, you mean it. You have gotten used to it. Your body and mind have adapted to a baseline of suffering that would drive an normal person mad. The revulsion is still there, but it's a dull, background noise now, not a sharp, piercing scream. This journey has changed you in a fundamental way. You came to sea seeking treasure, a chest full of gold coins, and you found it. You held it in your hands. You spent it on fleeting pleasures. But now, as you sit here, chewing on food that is barely fit for consumption, you begin to ponder the true cost of that treasure. What was the price? It was months of your life spent in a state of decay. It was the agony of scurvy, the filth of bee infestations, the constant, gnawing hunger. It was the horror of eating rats and the despair of chewing on your own shoes. You traded a piece of your health, a piece of your sanity, for a few weeks of drunken revelry and a full belly. Was it a fair trade? The great historical debate about piracy often boils down to this very question: was it a life of romantic freedom or a life of brutal desperation? The answer, you now understand, is that it was both, inextricably intertwined. The freedom was real, the freedom from the king's oppressive laws, the freedom of a democratic vote on your own ship. But it was a freedom paid for with profound, unrelenting hardship. The desperation was equally real, the desperation of starvation, disease, and the constant threat of a violent death. They were two sides of the same tarnished coin. You look at the gold earring one of your crewmates wears, a common affectation among pirates. A little-known piece of folklore claims these gold earrings served a practical, morbid purpose. It was said that the gold was enough to pay for a proper Christian burial if a pirate's body washed ashore. It was a down payment on a decent end to an indecent life. Whether this is true or just a myth, it speaks to the pirate's intimate relationship with death. You finish your meal. You push the empty bowl away. The food has filled your stomach, but it has not nourished your soul. You think about the gold that might be waiting over the horizon, in the hold of some Spanish galleon. You try to summon the excitement, the greed, the hunger for riches that first drove you to this life. But the image in your mind is not of gold coins. It's the image of a fresh orange, its skin bright and clean. It's the memory of the burst of sweet juice, the feeling of life and health flooding back into your body. You now understand the ultimate pirate's truth. The real treasure isn't the gold you steal, it's the food you eat when you get back to shore. The gold is just the key that unlocks the pantry. It's a means to an end, and the end is a brief, glorious respite from the rot. You look at your hands, the calluses, the scars. You feel the slight-ache in your gums, a ghost of the scurvy that will never truly leave you. You have survived. You are a pirate. You are rich in experience, if poor in spirit. And as the ship rocks gently beneath you, carrying you towards the next prize and the next famine, you are left alone with the quiet, unsettling knowledge of the true, terrible price of gold. The ship rocks gently now, a cradle on the deep. The creak of the timbers is a lullaby, a familiar sound that has followed you through fever dreams and star-filled nights. The journey is over, but the memories linger, soft and blurred at the edges, like water stains on an old map. The sharp tang of the orange, the phantom taste of salt and decay, the warmth of the rum spreading through your chest, they are all part of you now, woven into the fabric of your quiet thoughts. The faces of your crewmates fade, their loud laughter softening into a distant echo on the wind. The black flag with its grinning skull no longer seems menacing, but peaceful, a final, silent joke. You are drifting now, not on the merciless ocean, but on the gentle currents of sleep. The hard edges of the world dissolve. The gnawing hunger is gone, replaced by a profound and gentle stillness. There is no more suffering, no more struggle. There is only the soft, dark comfort of the tide, pulling you deeper and deeper into the calm, quiet harbor of your dreams. Let the waves carry you. Let the silence hold you. Rest now. Your voyage is done. The end of the article. Good night.